Hi guys, welcome to SEAL Team 7. It's good to have you all back. Today I'm really excited about this episode. This episode is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I've got two of my favorite guests, powerhouse content creators, who I've had on the show several times independently, and we've all talked a lot with each other, but this is the first time they've both been on my show together. And they do represent, we'll say, different poles of the same Final Fantasy world, and so it's going to be really exciting to have the rich variety of opinions and insights that they provide on this particular topic. And I'm going to start
an afterworld to mine.
Who's the world of ruin, right? I'm gonna go ahead and start with Night Sky Prince, who is a good friend of mine, and I chose for this particular cast because, it's even in his name. So, Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do and what you've got coming up?
Awesome. I'm the Night Sky Prince. I'm the guy who makes a whole crap ton of Final Fantasy content for YouTube. You may have seen me. As you can tell by the name, Night Sky Prince, I was inspired by Versus XIII's trailers growing up, and it's been hugely influential to me to see how Versus to 15 has grown. Before 15 even came out, I was cosplaying Noctis. That's how excited I was for the prospect of this project. It's something that has been near and dear to me my whole life, and what's obviously inspired me to start creating and why I even chose the name. And seeing it potentially being represented in KH4 has me really excited, and so I'm super glad to be on here and discuss that, and I plan on doing a whole bunch of content. I put out a video just the other day that breaks down all the Versus 13 references in Kingdom Hearts 4 so far, and I'm going to be doing a whole bunch more content discussing those references and where I think this is ultimately going, so I'm super excited.
Thank you, Ryan. And Philip, who I've had a lot of conversations with, and I've heard him talk a lot, mostly outside of official capacity, about the progression of Final Fantasy Versus XIII to what it ultimately has become in the modern era. I've had a lot of conversations about Nomura, about Kingdom Hearts with him, and I think he's got a really informed take on this as well. And so, Philip, why don't you tell us about everything you do, not just this, but your filmmaking, etc.
Hey guys, my name's Philip Hartshorn. I'm a filmmaker. You may have seen my documentary of me living at the Shaolin Temple on YouTube, which was a blast. You may have seen my cosplay. I was the male Tifa, the real Italian Tifa, with my girlfriend who was the female bear. That was a lot of fun. And of course, I love analyzing the cinematic language of Final Fantasy. That's another thing I do on YouTube on a separate channel. And just from when I was a kid, Versus 13 was a massive influence just from seeing that as a kid, and like that level of just cinematic language and integrity when vision was mind-blowing. I'm going to talk a lot about that vision today, I hope, with the boys here. And just such an inspiration to me growing up. And then the fact that it has sort of disappeared, and then it might rematerialize and be able to in some capacity be expressed in Kingdom Hearts 4 and beyond is just super exciting. So I mean, I think we all agree on that, and I can't wait to chat with you guys today about it.
Thank you, guys. So to introduce the topic a little bit, there's a lot to this. This is a story. I mean, this is a real journey, and I'm going to start with my own personal experience with this, which is that in 2006, back when it was still kind of hard to go to E3, I was invited to E3 because of the industry I was in at the time. And so I got to go to the E3 in 2006 with a group of people, and we got a little copy of the program and what things were gonna be shown off. And day one, I made it my goal to find the Square Enix booth for their very first presentation. It said that there was going to be a presentation starting at like 8:30 a.m. and I waited in line at the door with other people, and there weren't really lines at E3 the same way that there are now. It's not like you ran into E3 and you saw a lot of people in cosplay or anything like that. The people in cosplay were paid to do so, and it was more of an industry event. And but there was this buzz. There was just this buzz, and I was in line. I was waiting for the door to open, and as soon as the doors open, I'm starting to go fast, and I notice a bunch of people around me are starting to go fast, and I was at peak health at the time, so I was pretty fast. And so I made it into the first group, the first showing of the Square Enix booth, which is actually pretty far from the entrance. And I was in there with Adam West, who was there for actually a Family Guy thing. And so he had already been in the room. He didn't have to run. I didn't run as fast as an ailing Adam West, although I think he still probably could have taken me. And Serge Tankian, the lead singer of System of a Down. Very random, and I know, like, what's this all about? Well, the thing is, I was in a room with 20 people, some of which are very famous, and all we wanted to see was what Square Enix was going to show us. We had no idea. There had been a tech demo released for Final Fantasy VII for the PS3. It was this tech demo, and it got everybody hyped up for what's Final Fantasy going to look like on the new generation, which, at the time was the PS3. And Metal Gear Solid 4 had been announced, and, was being shown off there too. And they show off 2 trailers in there. They show off Final Fantasy XIII, which looked super cool. Like, it really, had this, it's like this Final Fantasy. It had Blinded by Lights was playing. It's like a really cool deal, like Lightning seemed at the time to be this, potentially engaging character, because we didn't know any better yet. And then they showed off this other thing. This thing comes out, and it's this trailer, and it's, clearly kind of a surprise to everybody, and it just says Final Fantasy Versus XIII, presented to you by Tetsuya Nomura, and he gives this little blurb speech that I couldn't understand and nobody was translating, and then the very first trailer for Versus XIII comes off, and everybody was blown away, and everybody in the room and everybody that I talked to had considerably more interest in Versus 13 than 13. They wanted to know what was going on. Kingdom Hearts was super hot right now. People at the Square booth were telling us, we don't really even know what this is. We've heard rumors that this is about, and I'm telling you, this came from Square people's mouth. We've heard rumors that this is an origin story for Organization 13 from Kingdom Hearts, and that it's going to weave into the Final Fantasy world in a more grounded and mature way. Ooh. And that's what they told us. And we're like, whoa, that's crazy. The history of Versus 13 really goes downhill from there. But that was like a life-changing experience for me, is the trailer in 2006 for this game that I would end up waiting for more than a decade. And I'm going to let some of these other guests talk about the transition to what it ultimately became. But the cliff notes is that after years of development hell, it became Final Fantasy 15, changed directors, changed creative vision entirely, changed engines. And 15, while I personally enjoyed a lot of 15 in ways that I never thought I would, in ways that I never thought I'd enjoy a game. It was absolutely not what I signed up for in 2006. So why we're talking about it now, and this is just a brief intro, is that after Final Fantasy 15 was released, it was clear that 15 was a very different product from the one that Nomura had envisioned. It was clear that Nomura was very emotionally attached to Versus 13, but he didn't get to make that game. And in 2018, a couple of years after the release of 15, Kingdom Hearts 3 came out. And when you wander into the Toy Story town, a trailer plays for something called Virum Rex that seemed pretty clearly like a reference to the original Versus 13. For those of you that don't know, Virum Rex is supposed to be sort of a meta it's like a game within a game. You know, it's a game world within a game world. And Virum Rex means the true king in Latin. The lead character of Virum Rex, Yozora, means the Night Sky Prince. Also, a reference to 15, Noctis Lucis Caelum, is Latin for Night Sky Prince. And there's all these references. Then, after Kingdom Hearts 3 concludes, Remind comes out, which is a DLC, and we see that this Yozora thing, this Virum Rex thing, has a ton more significance to the Kingdom Hearts universe than just a reference. It's not just like, hey, this is what could have been, here's me throwing it in your face. They got a highly, like a pretty high profile actor to play Yozora, Dylan Sprouse. Yeah. They've got they put in a battle with him as the secret boss, which is not only substantial, but they increase the amount of references. It becomes overwhelming that that the world that Yozora is from, Quadratum, is going to be not only the setting for the next game, but maybe the center of all of it, and that is quite literally based on the world of Versus 13. And so a lot of people have then come up with a variety of theories that this is Nomura's chance to make the game he wants through Kingdom Hearts, etc. And so that's what we're talking about today. And I'm gonna take it over to Night Sky Prince, who recently released a video comparing the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer with Versus 13 and the world of Virum Rex. Can you tell us about what happened with Kingdom Hearts 4 and why it took everybody by surprise and what you think is going on?
Yeah, of course. Well, to start with Kingdom Hearts 4, I think we really have to go all the way back to Remind, right? And really Kingdom Hearts 3, when Virum Rex was first shown off. And the thing that was like the biggest, I don't know if you want to call it red flag, sign, but the thing that always caught my eye was the fact that Yozora, his facial proportions and the way he's rendered, I was like, he's not rendered like a Kingdom Hearts character. And that's really significant. And I kept harping on that. And I didn't see anyone else making a big deal about it at the time. And I'm like, this is probably the biggest deal. The fact that he does not look like an actual Kingdom Hearts character, right? Because we've seen characters from like other worlds, like like from Pirates World, for example, where things look a little bit more realistic there. But we've never seen, even the Final Fantasy characters in Kingdom Hearts don't look as Final Fantasy as Yozora does. Yozora looks like Sora. Yeah, exactly. He looks like he could walk out of Final Fantasy 15 or 7 remake. That's how Yozora's proportions and rendering looks like. So it's like, that is really interesting to me. Why would you insert a character in here that clearly looks like he is from another franchise, right? On top of all the details that were being made. And so originally, but when Kingdom Hearts 3 first dropped, right, the secret movie actually didn't come with it yet. It was something that you were able to download and unlock like a week later or so. And so at first, when I was just watching the Toy Story trailer, I was kind of just like, Oh, okay. This is a really cool reference that he made to Versus 13, and he even got Square Enix to spend a few $1 million paying Visual Works, which is like their internal CGI studio, to make like a giant middle finger to everyone who took him off the project, right? So he put like this trailer, like a brand new trailer for Versus 13 in the middle of Kingdom Hearts 3. I'm like, that's actually pretty cool. Props to Nomura on that. And then the secret movie dropped like a week later, right? You could go unlock it. And then I was like, oh no. So and Riku are actually there. They're actually in Quadratum. There is Yozora, and something that sounds like Somnus's leitmotif is playing in the background. I was like, oh, this is more. This is more than what we thought it was. This is not just a cool reference to Versus 13. Whatever he's doing is going to be, linked into Versus 13, right? And then what ends up happening is that we get the Remind DLC like a year and a half later. And Yozora is the final boss, right? And normally, if you guys know anything about like final mixes of Kingdom Hearts games, normally the super boss that they add, the hardest boss in the game, is always tied into the next big story arc or the next big game in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, right? So we had like Lingering Will,
right?
And that tied into Birth by Sleep,
BBS,
yeah, exactly, or Birth by Sleep, Super Boss, so on and so forth, right? And so at this one, with Yozora being like the big super boss at the end, I'm like, oh, this is really about to go somewhere. And that's when they dropped on us a 1-for-1, shot-for-shot recreation of the 2011 Versus 13 trailer. It was at that point where Nomura basically said, I'm not kidding anymore. I'm not beating around the bush. I'm not BSing about this. This is exactly what this is. And at the time, there were so many people who were just straight up in denial about it. They're like, this has nothing to do with Versus. I think it's more connected to The World Ends With You, which was BTFO'd. I remember a whole bunch of people trying to tell me they thought it was Tweeby at the time. I was like, this doesn't have anything to do with Tweeby. I love Tweeby, no big fan of Tweeby. I was like, there's nothing. I was like, other than like,
man.
Like, you could equate this to the Reapers game, but I'm like, this is not Tweeby. This is like almost 100% Versus 13. And at that moment, that's when it was pretty much vindicated that this is 100% about Versus 13. And now we're at Kingdom Hearts 4, and he's doubled down even more on the Versus 13 references. We have this taking place in what's called in Japanese Shin no Sekai, which means World of the Dead. In the English version of the trailer, they called it an afterworld. It loosely means the same thing, more or less. It's a matter of nuance, but I think that Shin no Sekai may highlight exactly the sort of climate or the sort of tone that he's going for a little bit better. And that is all to say that, this is definitely connected to Versus 13. And where things go from here is what's going to be interesting for me.
Agreed. So, Philip, in your experience, first of all, why don't you tell us your experience of the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer and everything that you experienced regarding Kingdom Hearts 3 and Virum Rex, etc.
Yeah, I very well put, Ryan. I think I love, like, for me, it was just sort of this, like I said, when I did my Kingdom Hearts 4 reaction, it's just like, one of the reasons I love Kingdom Hearts in general is because it's a game that's, since the beginning, has all been about nostalgia, right? Like, when we grew up, we knew these Disney movies. Pop in Kingdom Hearts, and we're like, oh, cool, it's got this, like, for those of us who are FF fans, like, oh, it's got this Final Fantasy feel, and like, wow, Simba's here, and the Little Mermaid, and, Peter Pan, like all these amazing things that we grew up with. So it's like you're getting a new story, but we're getting to kind of feel those old memories of our childhood brought back. And it's just continuously this like compounding accumulation of those feelings, because now with Kingdom Hearts 2 and 3, we have the Kingdom Hearts that we grew up with and these characters, plus more Disney movies that came out, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. This is continuously, just sort of feel good build on all that stuff of nostalgia. And now, of course, we have this, when I saw Virum Rex, as you said, in the Toy Story world, I'm just like, what is going on? And I already seen just like, I didn't know what it was, but I think I saw like people on the internet just losing their minds about like Versus 13. I'm like, what is happening? So I get to Toy Story and I see this, and I think I had a similar reaction to many. I'm like, oh, what's this cool new character? Like Ryan said, something even subconsciously is already like, whoa, this looks different. What's going on here? The art style is more serious than Kingdom Hearts. Like in general, even the lighting and stuff is dark. You know, it's not this like beautiful, bright, fun thing. It looks very tragic, and there's all these tones, and you kind of think, wait, this feels like, nah, can't be. And then all of a sudden he's sitting in the same pose as Noctis, Virum Rex. Like, wait a second. So yeah, I agree. I thought it was just a fun reference, but it's almost bittersweet, right? Because you're like, whoa, I get to relive those like feelings of the old trailers, but just a fun reference. And I was always of the camp. It's like, yeah, like I always joke, Nomura is not like sneaking in, like Ryan just said. It costs millions or hundreds of thousands to produce a video like that. You can't just like conjure that up as a little joke you sneak in to, you know, get back at somebody. So I'm like, I was always of the camp. It was this like big planned thing. But yeah, like we also, like you just said, at the end of the game, there's these other references. And when that Remind ending comes out and I saw that, I was just like freaking out, because as someone who loves cinematic language, I've watched that 2011 trailer a million times and just been so impressed how he constructs those shots. And then to see it one for one, it was just like mind boggling for something that is perceived dead. Versus 13. Sort of like resurrected in a weird way with 15, right? To think that it might be possible to get even a little taste of what it could have been is just so exciting. And then yeah, with the Kingdom Hearts 4, it's just like, okay, we're getting an idea finally of how this is gonna materialize in front of us and how it's gonna be expressed. But I think I'm just very excited in general. And then to touch on sort of the weird middle child of this whole thing is, of course, Final Fantasy 15, right?
Yeah.
And to agree with Clark, I had a great time with that game. Just a very complicated time with that game, because such an inspiration in 2006 with Versus. By the time that comes out 10 years later, it's like, oh, this is pretty much unrecognizable, and all the stuff that we love from those trailers has been taken out, repurposed into Kingsglaive, you name it, right? And sort of all that feeling and charm and stuff was pretty much gone. But the game is cool, and it has a lot of it does one thing really well, and that is the brotherhood aspect, right? You really got that like road trip brotherhood aspect. And I've told this ridiculous story many times, but I was currently living in a New York City studio apartment, like some insane social experiment with 3 of my other male friends, we called it the room. It was just a room in New York City. There's one bathroom. It was just an open floor plan, and we play Final Fantasy 15. And in this time, we're like, oh my god, it's 4 guys, you know, it's just like us. And we had this great like camaraderie and everything, and we were like, oh, who's who, you know, who's the most Gladio, and like who's the whatever, the Papa Bear, and who's the sciencey Ignis guys. It was an absolute blast. And again, like it should have been on like a reality TV or something, because it was insane scenario. But I digress. Great game in its own way, but it lost all those feelings for us, right? Of the atmosphere and the word I used earlier, vision.
Well, and I want to talk about that. Okay, so we can't avoid that as a topic.
Yeah,
so
we have to touch on it.
There's a real. So no matter how you look at what happened to Final Fantasy 15, it's still a tragedy. Even if you, and you know, there's a lot of feelings about the personalities involved, and I do want to say that I have a lot of respect for most of the people that work creatively in the field, let alone at Square Enix. You know, a lot of these names, people, because they're at the, you know, they're the first name you see, you know, they pull a lot of the blame. But I'd like you all to remember that the first name you really see is Square Enix. And there's these corporate decisions that oftentimes lead creative people to do things that they don't necessarily want to do. And there's a lot of that has happened, in my opinion, in the last 15 years at Square Enix. and it's getting, in some ways it's getting better. The allocation of human resource, spreading creatives thin, so what I'll say is that the two personalities involved when we have this conversation are usually Tetsuya Nomura, and Tabata, who ended up, getting the mantle of Final Fantasy 15. I will say that if you look through developer interviews and you go through the development process, the updates, the game that Final Fantasy 15 was supposed to be, the one that Tabata wanted to make, was also much better than the one that we got. And again, I loved 15. Like when 15 came out, I had this experience. Like there was some moments in 15 where I was like, no way this isn't a video game. Like the Titan fight, the very first time that we hear, Apocalypsis Noctis, like the music crescendos, and it's just like, this is bonkers. This is like Apex Final Fantasy right here. This is incredible. Like the first time you get on a chocobo on an open world, you're like, I'm in the future, bro. Like it's bananas. There's a ton of moments like that where you're like, this is high concept, amazing. But if you look at what Tabata wanted to make, it was really good too. And I hate to say this, but a lot of my fans are Final Fantasy VII people that have come in just to have a related conversation. And Tabata's initial plans for Crisis Core were really good too. They're so good that I disdain Crisis Core for the missed opportunity that it was. It was originally going to be on 2 UMDs, and so Tabata's gotten a lot of pushback from Square too on how he wants to make things that he wants to make. So it's not just Nomura who, this was his project. This is something that he started. But let's talk about Nomura really quick. The tragedy for me of Nomura is that he created these characters. He created these characters. He created the core concepts of this, which we don't even really know what they are. We'll never know, really. But we know that it involves sleep. We know that it involves death. We know that, dreams are these incredible elements to the way that the universe functions. Like the mechanic of storytelling is intrinsically tied to dreaming and wakefulness, and elements that we see in passing and in Kingdom Hearts. These were like central to this story that was being told with these characters that were being made. The game that we ended up getting was somebody else's story with those characters, and that's a certain kind of just creatively as an artist, there's, regardless of what he said, I can't imagine a scenario where that wouldn't be really offensive. That wouldn't be really painful.
It's got to be devastating to, I would think it's devastating to even like as a writer.
Yeah.
To create characters who you've just penned and then, like in an outline, and then you really are excited about, and then they get lifted and used by somebody else. To get them that fully realized and the visual and designed and full vision and concepts on paper, and millions of people begging for you to tell that story and a massive
7
support,
years.
Then to get it taken out of your hands and totally bastardized. Again, not saying 15's bad. It's just very different, clearly vision.
Right.
It's got to be absolutely devastating as an artist. And then I will say, you just kind of made me think of this, Clark, with the magic system. You guys know I always talk endlessly about Brandon Sanderson. His like perfectly logical, well-constructed magic systems. Versus 13 had a very interesting and engaging one that was clearly very well thought out and had relations to Etro, the goddess, and seeing the light of the dead pass and them sharing this power and sleep and death, like a very interesting logical system. It appeared. And then sadly in 15 we get this just very basic like hodgepodge of those ideas. Like, okay, whatever, the armatures, the swords, like they got to be in there. So yeah, just their swords, cool. and this and that. Dreams is gone completely. Like actually, Ryan, you said in your video, it's like there's this dream sequence. Nobody knows why. It's just there. Clearly cost a lot of money, so they left it in. But yeah, totally useless scene. Like
I think that points to what happened, and it involved money, because it was Final Fantasy 15 was a huge risk as a game. Like it was the most serious departure from the Final Fantasy formula that we'd ever had. So, but it's clear that the game Tabata wanted to make with that formula probably didn't even involve those characters. So the use of those characters was very likely a corporate decision. I mean, it was very likely financially motivated to maintain. It's a lot more risky for them to make a game that departs that heavily from the essence and the identity of what Final Fantasy is, with completely new characters.
As a mainline title too.
As a mainline title with completely new characters. Like using Noctis, a very Final Fantasy character made by, at the time, the rock star of Square Enix. You think of Final Fantasy, you thought of Final Fantasy back then, you thought about characters designed by Tetsuya Nomura. So they used these characters that had buzz, attention, and they put them into Tabata's game. And this is what we got. And it looked like what it did. So I know
Oh, I was just gonna say, and I think if you read the interviews too, from Tabata talking about the transition from Versus to 15, what he tends to mention a lot is that, quite frankly, they would have changed even more had they not shown off so much already, like leading up to 15, and fans already having those sort of expectations. Because one of the things that Tabata even mentioned, at one point, they even kind of wanted to change like the clothing designs, but they were locked in with the Rowan contract.
The Rowan contract, yeah.
Which just makes no sense, because then it's like, oh, like it was supposed to be this nation that worships the death god and stuff, and then it's just like, yeah, I guess they just dress like cool like that. Like there's no reason for it. It makes no sense. Like that was their like military garb, and there's like, all this cool lore that was, again, very well thought out and made sense in that world. And then it's like, oh yeah, now they just look like that, and there's no lore reason to back it up. When people say like, why are they dressed like a band, like rock stars or something? They just do. It's just a thing. Like there's no explanation anymore. So it's a shame.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All those connections are missing now. And I guess what kind of frustrates me the most is that they weren't replaced with anything satisfactory, right? Like he had mentioned, he even mentioned when he talked about like why Versus 13 story was incompatible, or one of the reasons that it was, is because it would violate the age rating criteria in a number of countries, which it would. And that's because they did death god worship, which in China is you basically cannot portray that in any media, worshiping of the dead or reaper worship of any kind. So that means that Versus, or 15 I should say, couldn't be sold in China. And China is a big market for them, something that they've been trying to make a lot of progress in selling more in that market. And so for them to not be able to sell the story in China would be huge. That would cost them money. And so they basically rewrote the story so that they could sell that story in China. That was one of the biggest reasons why the death gods and the reaper worship stuff had to be cut. But the problem I have with it is that if you're going to take those themes away, and he even said that like, oh, okay, well now that black no longer represents, the connection to the reapers, we're going to make black a special color for another reason. Having played Final Fantasy 15, everything in Final Fantasy 15 universe, I have no fucking idea what that special reason or that special connection that black has to anything. There is none. Because there is none, right?
Yeah.
And so my problem isn't even so much that they just got rid of Versus 13 story with 15. It's that everything that was left over didn't get refactored in. And there's so many remnants of things that don't make any sense in the context of what 15 became. Like the lyrics to Somnus. This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense at all. It completely disconnected from the entire story.
That song and played it for like 15 seconds before the last dungeon, and then it just goes to like intense dungeon theme, not even a cutscene. And I was like,
it's a little bit better now in the Royal Edition because now there's actually a dungeon in Chapter 14.
Yeah, at least it's a dungeon now. But it's oh god, I mean that I think was the nail in the coffin for me. Of like, I really did not approve of his directing because I was like, you took maybe one of the best compositions ever in Square Enix history, I think, Somnus, and that's how you used it, like as an artist. I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. So
yeah, and it didn't even loop through the battles either, right?
Right.
Yeah, so like as soon as you did it, like you go into a fight and then
and it would just break the feeling.
And now it's with the Royal Edition, it's like gone because it just plays in like the 10 feet of the start of when you enter Lucius, and then you walk and it goes to like an intense dungeon theme. There is no Somnus, so it's like what? I think that's one of the most offensive things is they took Shimomura's some of her most inspired songs, which what inspires a musician to do that is like think about like Hans Zimmer with Dune and stuff. Like what inspires them to make these like Oscar award-winning things and these amazing things is a vision, a feeling of what the director is going for. So look at whatever the hell that was got Shimomura to do that for Versus 13. Like every trailer has like mind-bogglingly good songs. Like he mentioned Nox Eterna, and I think one of the best like ones for actual scenes, that trailer. Somnus in the first one. Omnis Lacrima is one of my favorite songs ever that's in another trailer. Like every song he produced, and all of those songs are used very like offhandedly in Final Fantasy 15. It's so strange.
Yeah, very strange.
Playing it for like a fight with like a giant bird.
Yeah, it's like what? This is one of the most emotionally charged, tragic songs I've ever heard, but like powerful and we'll use that for like the random like monsters in the world, I guess. Like unbelievable directorial choices.
A lot of the music tracks and like the way they were originally intended to be played and the way they're played in the final game really are it's quite sad.
It's wasteful. I don't know what other word to use, but and I don't know which direction you want to take it, Clark. Feel free to guide us, but like, my God, I could talk about the trailers all day and why they're effective in ways that an entire game wasn't. The Versus 13 trailers are.
Well, I don't necessarily want to say that 15 was this massive failure. It did, I think, propel the series in a way that was important for a couple of reasons, and some of its failures I think were important. I think some of the failures are causing reflection in the way that the brand is moving forward. In 15 and in 7R and in 16, I think that some of the stuff that really ultimately held down 15 from being what it was, and it was successful, but it absolutely was successful, but like the feeling a lot of people have about that game retrospectively is like, oh, what a missed opportunity. But I do want to say that it's not really the intention of this show or this podcast to say that 15 was creatively a failure, or that Tabata is bad or anything like that. We're avoiding that kind of discussion. But
I got my
as I what is that?
No, that's a gigantic Final Fantasy 15 like 3D poster.
I thought it was a poster fridge. I was gonna say that's cool.
But
I was gonna say, like, I always preface when I talk about this, it's so complicated because it like you hear me just bash it like that. But what I always say is the tragedy of 15 is that it's a good game. It's
still a good game.
It should have been like the best game ever, and it's a great game. So you play it and you're like, it's so good, but it could have been that much better. And it just shows, like, again, a lot of those ideas that they were either forced to use or chose to, whatever, like Arden and all these things are still so good, even though it's like a skeleton, speaks to, you know, the clarity of that original vision, even though it's so watered down in 15.
And so that brings me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is so the characters here. So there's this transformation of several characters and the creation of some characters, and Arden ended up being one of the best villains in the Final Fantasy series, in my opinion. It's very complicated in concept, and I would say that the base game's execution of Arden was terrible. I would say that it gets much better thanks to the DLC and because of what was actually on paper about the character. But Arden is something that is very specific, and that concept is something very specific to 15, not Versus 13. We have no idea what the actual conflict arc really was in 13. We have clues, which brings us to Stella and Luna Freya. The change in those characters was so dramatic that it sort of shifted the entire kind of makeup of the game, like in a very dramatic way. And I want to hear what, in particular, Ryan has to say about that, and then you can follow up, Phil.
So the Stella Luna conversation is incredibly interesting. So let's start off with what Tabata has said about Luna Freya and why they replaced Stella with it, right? Interestingly enough, they said they felt like Stella wasn't a strong heroine, right? And so they wanted to replace Stella with the strong heroine.
It's ironic.
Now, I don't want to speak factually. That is what he said. I know a lot of people are going to be like, yo, what the... That is what he said. You can find many interviews on it where he said
it's gonna be important too, right?
Where he said that he felt like Stella was a weak protagonist, which may be true because we don't really know enough about Stella in order to really say that Stella was significantly better or worse than Luna Freya, right? But it's very interesting to me that they thought they were replacing whatever that was with something significantly stronger, because if I'm speaking in terms of personal opinion with what they did with Luna, it's hard for me to imagine something, again, personal opinion, that is weaker than what she was as a heroine, right? It's very hard because she barely had any screen time, right?
Right.
So it's very difficult for me to imagine then how how Stella's original concept was supposedly weaker. Now, if you do a little digging on it, there are some fairly reliable rumors that came out because 15 had a ton of leaks. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason that it had a ton of reliable leaks is because there were a lot of people working on the game during that transitional period who were not very happy about a lot of the things that happened on the game. A lot of people's creative work that they put into the game never saw the light of day. I know Roberto Ferrari has expressed some, discontentment with how a lot of his artwork went unutilized during the development. So what was cool about Stella is that it's the first time, maybe not the first time in the series, but the way it was presented, where the protagonist and the heroine were driven against each other to fight, was such a compelling idea, right? That maybe this doesn't have like a the same sort of romantic undertones that like 9 and 10 sort of had leading up to this. And maybe they have political forces that are driving them apart, right? And they have different perspectives, which made their relationship so much more interesting and fundamentally something that we hadn't seen in this series before. And that concept was so cool and so interesting to people. It's a big part of what drives home the disappointments that people have with Luna Freya, even more for those who do feel disappointed with her character, right? Is that she didn't live up to that sort of groundbreaking new type of heroine that everyone was really looking forward to. And so some of the rumors about Stella are quite interesting, right? And so I kind of get why some people feel like Stella was not going to quite actually be the heroine that people wanted. A lot of the rumors were that Stella was dead at the start of the game, which I found to be very interesting, and that Noctis was sort of the only one that was able to see her, which I found also very interesting. There were also some rumors out there that basically suggested that he actually killed her and he didn't remember it, and now he sees her as like a ghost.
That would have been so awesome. That would have been so rad. Oh,
yeah, that would have been really cool, right? That would have been like, oh man, I love that idea, actually. So I suppose that maybe when they look at it from like the perspective of trying to create, you know, a brand new mainline Final Fantasy, they kind of went in with the perspective that stuff is cool, maybe it's artistic, but it's not something that really fits, you know, the brand of what they want mainline Final Fantasy to be. But it's just it hurts to see that such a cool concept like Stella, or what we perceive of Stella. Again, we just really don't know that much about her. But I think the idea that the lead heroine and the hero are not necessarily on the same page, or have differing political views, or have their own interests. You know, Stella had to look out for Tenebrae. Like that's what she's there for. She's the princess, and she has to look out for her people and her own interest, right? And so if there is any sort of romantic involvement between her and Noctis, you kind of have to, I think that would manifest in like a really interesting way, like Romeo and Juliet, as some people have pointed out in the chat, right?
Sure.
There's that familial conflict, which I think makes for really good storytelling because it's really dramatic. And I think the other thing that I really wanted to say is that it's obvious that even Stella's role had evolved quite a number of times, because if you guys remember the original scene in the Versus 2011 trailers, from what we can tell at least, it seemed like Noctis and Stella, they were meeting for the first time. They were introducing each other in that, like, it's sort of like it looks like it was the signing ceremony, actually, I'm pretty sure. That's why they were there. The painting of Etros in the background, right? And so they were right, and they were meeting for the first time. And if you go forward to the 2013 trailer, you can already see that they kind of retcon that to make Noctis and Stella childhood friends, right? Because there's a scene with them running together in a field. Well, they weren't childhood friends before, from what we could tell, because they were meeting for the first time. So maybe that plays into the idea that he killed her and he doesn't remember. They have some kind of amnesia. Part of that rumor too is really interesting, because it said that the crystal ordained that Noctis kill her, and I found that to be like a really interesting idea. Like he was sort of like possessed, and it made him do it. But it just goes into show that as much as we sort of have this elusive view of Stella, that perhaps they didn't really have quite the vision, or they really didn't know what they were going to do with Stella to begin with either. So it's just so hard to say, really.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a lot of themes in 15 that are still pretty mature and advanced and dark. I mean, there's a world of ruin that occurs, etc. But it's there's so much of it that is almost mind-numbingly wholesome that I didn't see even an ounce of in any of the trailers of Versus 13.
Yeah.
Versus 13 was really going to be something that had a real edge to it. I mean, the overworld was, just, it was kind of dreary and dreadful. It wasn't, it didn't have that, this kind of fun vibe. And I never in a million years expected a harmonica to be involved in any portion of the soundtrack. And there's all these harmonica tracks, and not that the harmonica isn't good, but just like that's the kind of tone shift that they changed to. And I think
expect like diner music to be.
I
a lot
didn't
of the
expect any of
soundtrack
that. And
Versus 13.
I think a lot of
The
that
opening,
has,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of that does come down to something that that was said, and that's that this became a mainline title. What do you think about mainline titles maybe adapting a little bit more of a darker tone, a more of a Versus 13 tone? Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea? Philip.
I think it would have been great. And I mean, we have to remember that Versus 13 was going to be a side game, right? It wasn't like 14. It was Versus 13. It's like this kind of parallel to 13, but it had that like strange title attached to it. So, I mean, you could tell they were probably like, this is a super daring project. We're going to let Nomura do his first serious project and let him have complete control, not, make a bunch of Disney stories around your story or the opposite. And you could tell he had complete free reign because the tone is something we'd never seen from Final Fantasy at all. I think that's why, like Clark said, in that theater, everybody went, "Oh, cool, more Final Fantasy," and then what the hell was that? That was different, right? Like I want to see more of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it would have been great for them to go down that road because we have to remember, FF is always reinventing itself. That's what makes them all so great. They all have a very distinct tone. Like even like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, completely different vision and atmosphere in all of those. And they're all fantastic in totally different ways. And that's why there's so many strong fans who like have a favorite of those, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because they're so different and they draw people and attract people in different ways, or they resonate with people. But yeah, I think it would have been a great move just to do it. And the sad part is, well, I guess not sad, but sort of bittersweet, is we have 16, which is going to be rated mature, which has decapitations in the first trailer and blood, and it's just like, man, like why didn't they just do Versus 13? Like what are they doing? So that's kind of the bittersweet factor of it, is we have this coming out now when they're like, oh, people wanted Versus 13. Crap. Well, let's have 16 be dark. I get, like, it's just such a shame for what could have been. So obviously with Kingdom Hearts, we will not be having any female characters get murdered or anything like that. Like we said, possibility for Stella. It's not going to happen if that was the Versus 13 vision. But who knows? We hopefully will get some remnant of his vision on that, which, again, I could talk about it all day, is just so strong in those damn trailers. Like I've said this before, but in the space of a couple minutes of trailer, sometimes less than a minute, I think, depending on the trailer, Nomura establishes complete like tonality of the world and themes and atmosphere and just like musicality. Completely develops that without even speaking. There's no speaking in these trailers except for that one, which has, I think, like subtitles. It's not voiced, right? The Noctis Stella meeting, and it's just like, wow, it's so impressive. It's so impressive. So, yeah, it's definitely bittersweet, right, that they're getting serious now. What do you think? Nice guy.
So I find it really interesting, right? Because around this time frame that you have all this going on with 15 releasing and them deciding that all those themes are too dark for mainline Final Fantasy, basically 16 is greenlit around a few months after 15's release, and they start working on Final Fantasy 16. And then in between that time, they had basically already began development on Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I guess what I personally find interesting was, what was it that made upper management say, okay, 16 can go ahead and be M-rated, but we're going to take these other two titles that are in production and we want to keep you guys, like, we want this to be a teen-rated game. So I find that really interesting where they decided to draw that line with those games, and not do it for 16 and say 16's like, okay, this is going to be the one that we try something different, and we're going to try to make this more of a mature, darker game with all those things that we didn't let happen in 7R and 15, like the blood trail and 7R, a whole bunch of stuff in 15. So I find that really interesting why they decided to change that now. In terms of Final Fantasy being darker, I don't think that Final Fantasy necessarily needs to be darker. I don't think that that necessarily makes the story better, because I know there are some people who inherently think that makes the story better. But I think that when it's an option for them, it doesn't hinder the storytelling, right? So I think that sometimes those age restrictions can hinder certain things in the storytelling. Going back to the blood trail, for example, right? The blood trail had to be changed to meet age rating criteria. It was not necessarily a story change. Some people think that they decided to change it to match Genova's blood or something like that. This is something that they came up with after the fact because they couldn't run with the red blood. So I think
corporate made them. That's the sad part. It's
right.
Like, China won't buy this, so axe it.
Exactly, right? And so when it comes to stuff like that, that's when I feel like, okay, please go ahead and make it an M-rated game, because I feel like whenever it impedes on the artistic vision, that's when I think that we go ahead and push the age rating, and then that's when it's most appropriate. But in terms of Final Fantasy being darker, I kind of love to see it. I don't think that the whole series should become dark and bloody and gritty, but I think that with the series always being able to change tone, sometimes it needs to go in directions that it doesn't normally go, and I think that includes those dark, gritty directions, and being able to do that is really important. And I think the fact that we are still so passionate about Versus, a concept for a game in which we only saw trailers for a game that was ultimately only a quarter completed by the time it was completely scrapped, right, shows how compelling the art that we saw, the potential for the art that we saw, is. And so I think that if it's that valuable to have that art, and even if it's not conventionally what Final Fantasy is, it's worth pushing that boundary to deliver.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Agreed.
And so on that, the identity of Versus 13 was always strange. Now, when 13 and Versus 13 were announced, they were announced as part of a universe that was supposed to be connected, and it was Fabula Nova Crystallis, not Fabula. And
my bad.
And it that means the story of new crystals, not the fabulous new crystals, as a lot of people have misinterpreted.
They were fabulous. They were fabulous.
And so Versus 13 was meant to be a side project in that, and I think that's something that has been pretty consistent up until this point, is that with each Final Fantasy numbered title, you got a new world with a new world system. There were things that tied it to each thing. And so this idea of making, the 13 universe part of the same universe, it made a lot of sense at the time. It made sense that Versus 13 wouldn't be 14. It would be something else in the 13 continuity. And what ended up happening with 13 in the universe of Fabula Nova Crystallis is that it became a mess. There were other things that happened before we even heard of Versus 13 again. 13-2 and Lightning Returns came out, which were two other direct sequels, which was just it was bizarre. And it was because there was a lot, and there are plenty of documentaries and videos, some of which Night Sky Prince has published, that document the production pitfalls that led to this whole thing. But it made sense for Versus 13 to be its own thing, its own title. So it's not even necessarily about the maturity of it. It's that, it was going to be within this construct of Fabula Nova Crystallis, and so to have this other title. For instead to be this completely remanufactured main series title, at first when it was announced, I was like, that's a great idea. But the more I've I've detached from it over the years, the more that I've experienced it and thought about everything that happened, I think it really should have stayed versus 13. So where I'm leading to this is we've got this really dark, gritty story that was abandoned and repurposed into something weird. And so now what we're moving into is that we've got the creator of said concept placing it in literally the most censored and locked space, which is Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts has Disney on its back. So if you think censorship is bad just looking at China, you're now looking at China and Disney. So now we're in this really interesting, delicate space where Nomura is leveraging the fact, in my experience, my perception of what's happening is Nomura is leveraging the fact that he has creative power from two sources, not just Square, but from Disney. He cannot be detached from Kingdom Hearts. They can't move him from this program. Like, it's not just Square's decision anymore. So he is leveraging the fact that he has more cards to play by using the Disney thing. But the pitfall of that is that it's really hard to tell a story about death worshippers with blood and, tell a story where you're pitted against potentially your Juliet and, that the final conflict of the game is, you having to come to terms with the fact that you killed your lover. I mean, none of that stuff's happening in a Kingdom Hearts game. So instead, we've got to put these themes into something that is twice as censored and has to, by contract, include Disney.
Donald Duck.
Now, before, if you would have told me this in 2010, I would say there's absolutely no way this will ever work. However, Disney's recent, not so recent anymore, acquisitions of several new, we'll say, wider aged franchises has opened up some interesting possibilities. A lot of people immediately noticed that the forest sequences in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer at the Kingdom Hearts Anniversary event did look like Endor, and that if you look at a particular foot, it's the foot of an ATST. Unmistakably so. It is definitely an ATST from Star Wars. So now we've got these Disney-owned properties that can tackle some of these more mature themes. Maybe not to the M-rated level, but still, we see a lot of really heavy tragedy in the Star Wars universe. Marvel for sure. Netflix Marvel way for sure, and Disney Plus recently sort of worked that out. So there are going to be some Disney properties that, kind of toe the edge a little bit of, into hard R territory. So does that mean that we're going to see a Virum Rex Kingdom Hearts 4 that's going to be as edgy as the original Vision? What do you guys think? Ryan?
I can't imagine anything being as edgy as the original Vision. My concern is how still do you make any of that compatible, right? Because obviously this still has to be sold in China. And granted, it's not like Kingdom Hearts hasn't been censored before in China. If you've seen Winnie the Pooh from Kingdom Hearts 3, if you guys have not seen Winnie the Pooh from Kingdom Hearts 3, when you have some time, or pull out your phone right now if you're watching this on PC, and Google Winnie the Pooh in Kingdom Hearts 3, he's literally a ball of light. You cannot look at him, right? Because for those who don't know, Winnie the Pooh, the image of Winnie the Pooh is legal in China, because the leader there has often been compared to Winnie the Pooh. And he got so angry that people would joke that he looked like Winnie the Pooh that he banned Winnie the Pooh in all of China. So you cannot find images of Winnie the Pooh in China. In fact, it's actually illegal to have like imagery of Winnie the Pooh in China. So Winnie the Pooh in Kingdom Hearts 3 and is like heavily censored.
Yeah, having
China,
that is right on brand.
Yeah. So that's kind of how they do things there, right? And so they can't really go too deep into the Reaper worship because again, they do want to sell this game in China. So that already right there shows that they can't go too deep into what they wanted Versus to be, unless he kind of changes the framing around that and makes that differently than it was supposed to be. And it all kind of just goes back to me to sort of say that, like, Versus almost is a game that just unfortunately is just not meant to be in some capacity. It's just ill-fated in a way that it cannot be expressed in its fullness due to so many different circumstances that have basically made this game almost kind of cursed in a way. It sort of starts to feel like.
Yeah.
It just feels like everything that has happened to this project has been so cursed. Maybe that all goes back to the number 13. I don't know.
Maybe that there are some superstitions around that number for sure.
Yeah, and the number 4 too, which, as I explained in my video, which is deeply connected to death in a lot of Asian cultures, but including Japanese cultures. So Japanese culture, I should say. So it's very interesting that they presented that within Kingdom Hearts 4 already with Quadratum, right? 4, like 4 being like also the city of like death, right?
Right.
Isn't that really interesting? And then Kingdom Hearts 4 being about death, right?
Right.
So that already, to me, Nomura, he loves numerology. He really does.
He does.
He's a guy who's obsessed with numbers. And so I actually think that this is by far his most clever use of numerology, by far. Like, I think that this is when I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty good. You actually got me there, because there's a lot of good cultural significance there. Whereas I think that, like, some things like Organization 13 and the 7, I was gonna say Warriors of Light. I guess that's kind of what they are, right? And stuff like that. That stuff.
Yeah.
That stuff. I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. You like 7 and 13, but this was actually like, I was like, oh, okay, that's really clever. I like that.
Yeah, it worked really well. And he is, really, what we're looking at is that the concept is that Sora at the end of 3, in case you don't know, like, dies or something. But like in the way that people die in Final Fantasy games, right? So it's just like this optional thing, like a moving to the next phase thing. And so when Sora awakens in this place, it is he's literally woken up dead, and so already that's this kind of, it's a more mature tone. And so there's definitely, I think, room for more maturity without, kind of some of the blood and guts, and there's room for that. And I will say that regardless of how censored this is, one thing we can say is that this is definitely going to be Nomura's vision. So he is kind of unhindered in being able to tell the story the way that he wants. So I think at very least that's good. At very least that we are going to see, some of the core concepts that we'll never get to see from Versus 13 in this game. But obviously, like, we can't expect that whoever the final conflict of Kingdom Hearts 4 is about, presumably the Master of Masters, presumably the Lost Master, was going to be the primary villain of Versus 13. Obviously a bunch of stuff has changed to set the dramatic arc of this to be centered around a different point. So at a fundamental level, we're never getting Versus 13, and nobody's saying otherwise. But what I am seeing a lot of is that people are kind of in this bizarre denial state. Like, no, this isn't Versus 13, guys. These are just themes and references. This is way more than themes and references. This still feels incredibly personal. This still feels like he's not just using this in the way that he used, say, Cloud showing up in Kingdom Hearts 1. He's not just using this in the way that the other Final Fantasy showed up as like these other characters. This isn't just other characters. This is something essential to the plot of Kingdom Hearts now. And so
and there's an interesting point to be made that like Cloud in Kingdom Hearts is not actually Cloud, right? Like it's not like that's a canon place that Cloud goes in the FF7 story, right? Like he doesn't actually go to Kingdom Hearts, and him and Squall and stuff like live together and start, he hangs out with the FF people. Whereas that begs the question, is this actually going to be related to Noctis? Like what if this was, or is this going to be, his like reincarnation of Noctis with his thing? I'm going to switch my camera battery here. But yeah, it's just like, there's a lot of questions. What do you think, man?
I actually was joking and said on my stream, wouldn't it be so great if the final boss fight of the game was just Noctis? Like not
actual Noctis,
but it was just actual Noctis. I would be screaming.
It's screaming.
That'd be amazing.
It's Tabata. They just put Tabata's face in there.
Yeah, and I agree. Whoever the final boss is going to be, it is going to be some deep but very blatant metaphor for everything with Versus 13.
Yeah,
it's going to be something that like hits the nail on the head and makes you go, "Oh my god, he fucking went there. He did it. He did it." Yeah. And everyone is going to be talking about it. I think that the final boss is going to be really interesting.
Well, no, I was just saying, here's the real like sort of weird thing about all this is we don't know what Nomura's vision actually fully was. Like we can get the little that we got, but the real interesting thing is, unless he says in an interview, like we could have just an amazing story with like Yozora and Sora working together or whatever it's going to be. And these other characters that look like, Ignis, Arden lookalikes and Stella lookalikes in the trailer. But then if he does do his vision, like we don't know because we don't know what the vision was. Right. So it might just be a really cool story. That's like, don't know, but unless he comes out and says like, so a lot of these concepts were, what I was envisioning for Versus 13, but had to leave the project. That would be awesome. But I mean, a lot of it's going to be invisible to us, which is interesting.
A lot of it will be, but from what we can tell so far, it seems like he's very much working in the framework of referencing those trailers, right? Yeah. Like the recreation of the scene from the 2011 trailer that he recreated shot for shot. He's using those to sort of build up. And so while I think that there still probably will be quite a lot of stuff that is invisible to us, I think that there will be enough metaphor there to sort of be like, oh, okay, this was what's actually supposed to happen to that character in here. And this is what was meant to actually happen. I think that his goal is to sort of put that into fans' minds about like what those things are meant to be. And so I think that he's going to work it in such a way that even if some of the more minute stuff goes over your head, the macro of kind of what some of the things in that story were going to be will be apparent enough through metaphor.
And we do have these like facsimile characters like the Stella sort of look like girl. So
exactly.
Like, oh, okay, maybe that was what was going to happen with Stella. So we'll be able to infer a lot. True.
Right, and we're already inferring quite a lot too, like from just what we have already being built upon what the established knowledge that we have of Versus, right? And so, and kind of going back to something that was mentioned earlier with sleep and death, I find it really interesting because in episode Dust Sky, I really don't know if this line is still in the final game. You guys tell me if you remember it. But there was this line from Prompto and Noctis where Prompto basically says, whenever you sleep, it's like you're dead. He says that to Noctis. And Noctis kind of just brushes it off. But Prompto like really makes kind of a bigger deal about it, and he's kind of like, no. When you sleep, it is literally like you are dead. It's weird. It like the way Prompto delivers the line, he's like, it freaks me out like really bad. How like when you sleep, it's like you're not alive. And that line is like clearly a remnant of like the transition between those two stories, right? And so just to me, like the idea that the opening of the trailer starts with Sora and he's asleep, but he's dead, and there's this alternate reality, and then what we know of Noctis, and when Noctis sleeps, Noctis experiences these sort of alternate realities and these sort of different timelines. It's very interesting to me that is how Kingdom Hearts 4 specifically chooses to start out, because that idea was so integral to what Versus was.
Right.
Love it. Yeah. No, it's going to be so much fun. And like, I hope that he's able to be open, or, you know, is able to talk about these things. There's an interview for a couple of years ago. Do you remember when he was like on a live show? I can't remember who he was on with. It might have been Kitase. And he was like, oh, yeah. And then somebody said, like, Versus 13, and Nomura was like, oh, I thought we weren't allowed to say that anymore. And he's like, oh, yeah, you can say it now. It's this weird, like, what? Was Nomura, like, under a contract that said he can't ever say that for, like, 5 years? Maybe. But we don't know.
From what he said, he basically was under like an NDA of some sort where he could not talk about Versus 13, and apparently that expired, so that now he can, right? Because he didn't know how to approach, because what happened was that they were adding Versus Noctis's clothing as an alternate clothing option for Dissidia NT, right? Yeah. Right, and he was just like, he was dancing around it, and one of the other directors for NT was there, and he just said Versus on there, and Nomura was like, oh, okay, we're allowed to talk about it. And then he was like, he also mentioned that he could basically, I think he kind of teased that like one day maybe he'll write a whole book on that whole situation, which tells me that, I mean, quite obviously, there's a lot
of stuff
that that transpired.
Like, again, what I was saying earlier, just imagine being an artist. Not only do they take your ideas and run with it and finish it, but you can't even say the name of your thing anymore. That's so disturbing. Like, think about that.
It really is. It's almost dystopian in a way, isn't it? Like, you know, just steal that creativity out of your brain.
He said in another interview that like he literally views Sora and Noctis as his children. Like the characters are that important to him, and that's what's so sad.
They stole his son.
It's like when Disney, tricked Lucas into thinking they were gonna make his story treatment, and then threw it in the trash. That's the only reason he sold it to them. He was like, I literally felt like I got tricked into selling my children to slavery. That's what he said about Disney. It's a very similar thing,
and it's very weird, and I know that he has to feel quite strongly about it, and there are not a number of people, but there are some people who I feel like are disillusioned about the situation and saying that this is all completely just utterly different things, and I don't agree that they are unrelated in any capacity. Nomura is doing something very specific here, and I think whatever he's doing, it's gonna be very interesting to see. It's probably the most interested I've been in anything that he's worked on creatively, and I don't mean like anything that he's touched, right? I mean like projects that he's like really led, specifically Kingdom Hearts.
Right.
I find it to be like the most provocative thing that he's done in a really long time. Like, this has me gripped really hard. I'm very interested.
Oh yeah,
in
I
this.
mean, just the concept that is being like, I don't even know, the attempted or it's just so creative here, and it's so smart too for that. I mean, again, this is clearly a company-wide decision. Nomura's not secretly remaking Versus 13 like some people also seem to think. It's like, what? Like,
well, okay, now I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think there is a little bit of a power dynamic here. And I think that he is in a unique position to be more assertive with this, because Disney's involved as well. It's not just Square pushing, or trying to protect this identity anymore. I really do believe, and I've heard this from some people, that Nomura could pull this off with Kingdom Hearts, but not on his own project, not on a Square only project. I don't think that he could put this into I don't think he could put this into Strangers of Paradise or, a spin-off title. Like, this is the only way he really has the kind of leverage, because they've historically pulled Nomura off of projects before so that he could work on Kingdom Hearts specifically. And so now, what's he saying? Well,
can't pull me off this one, you sons of bitches.
Can't pull me off of Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts is the thing. You give me Kingdom Hearts, I'll give you Versus 13. I think there is a little bit of that here. And I know that's a big guess, and a lot of people want to avoid the possibility that there's anything beyond toxic positivity occurring out of this franchise, but I think that's just copium. I think that this is kind of what we're seeing, and that's what makes it compelling. I don't think that the use of this stuff is being used as marketing to get people more interested in Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts doesn't need more people interested in it, using this kind of stuff. Kingdom Hearts has Disney the most, you throw a lightsaber in here, people are gonna flock to this. Instead, what we're being shown is something that Nomura wants to show, not because it'll attract us, not because they're gonna fix something. They don't need that. This is very clearly him telling us, this is the creative direction I'm going.
Cancel a video game isn't really gonna help sales for Kingdom Hearts 4 with a bunch of Disney properties in it, right? Yeah, it's not gonna. It wouldn't boost it in that way. Like you said, it's very much deliberate about what he wants to do, and that's also what's so cool to me, right? There's something that's just so cool to me, that this is him kind of saying, this is my project, this is what I want to do, F the man.
Yeah,
I really like that, and I really respect that. And I haven't always agreed with Nomura creatively. In fact, within the past 10 years in creative decisions that he's made, I've probably disagree with him tremendously more than I agree with him. But by far, I think in the past decade, this is the coolest decision that he's made. I have a lot of respect for him doing this, because I think that it's really awesome to be able to do this at any point in time, because of the way that creatives are restricted so often by the money that sort of owns the creativity, right? And so for a creative to be able to use this as a way to take the people who own the intellectual property and flip that back on them, and sort of make this meta commentary about them in a way, I find that to be cool. I find it to be powerful and very interesting.
Yeah, and that's what's cool, is really, no matter what your opinions on his past works or anything, man, what a creative idea. That's kind of where I am too. I don't know if I'm gonna love every single part of Kingdom Hearts 4, but even though I loved Kingdom Hearts 3, I'm still the most excited I've been about that entire franchise in so long, just because I have so much nostalgia for Versus and everything, and also Star Wars. Hello, It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
We could literally have Noctis, Luke, like Anakin, like fighting God, like the Master of Masters at the end of the game or something. It's just insanity. Like it's gonna be so much fun. But yeah, I think it's just great. And I've said vision so many times tonight. I think it's like my keyword of the night here. But his vision is so strong, and me being someone who very much cares about cinematic language and just sort of that more Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 era, before they started to get away from that a little bit, of really presenting these, like, you know, we talk about scenes that are video game medium changing scenes, right? Like the end of FF7, or, you know, Sephiroth walking through the flames, and then of course the opening of FF8, the Yuna sending scene. Like, these are, especially for the early technology, but when you get to Yuna sending, like, masterpiece scenes that you can go back and watch that have never been encroached on at that point in the medium. But I guess what I'm saying is, in that sort of 10-year gap from like the 13 kind of like era where we didn't get that much, that seemed to have gone away a little bit with Square Enix. That just kind of like revelry in cinematic language and in visual storytelling is very much not present in a lot of the later projects. And 15 is really the ultimate example of that. Like, taking these trailers, which are, in my opinion, still the best of that caliber, like right up there with the Yuna sending and that level of cinematic language. And then in 15 game, there's a couple scenes that are visual works, but besides that, it's like some of the most mundanely shot scenes, I think, in the history of Final Fantasy. And again, that's coming from me who cares like particularly a lot about these things. Like, most people might not agree with me there. They might not have like caught it as much, but what I'm excited for is this sort of vision being brought back with 7 Remake. There is a celebration of using visual storytelling to portray emotions without even speaking in 7 Remake, and that's one of the reasons I think it's a masterpiece. And also with Kingdom Hearts 4, it seems like we're going to be getting a little bit back into that vision that was just more that era of Square Enix. It's hard to describe. And I think a lot of you know what I mean, though, even subconsciously. Like, go back and look at some of those scenes from FF10 and look at 15 or scenes like that. And it's just not there. And this has nothing to do with lore, with world building. This is just visually the use of a higher level advanced cinematic language. And it seems like they just kind of don't care as much anymore. But Nomura is of that old era, is my point. And he's
Nomura is a visual storyteller, absolutely.
Yes,
and so, you know, when telling a story visually, it's pretty important that the story is good that you're telling. And
yes.
Where I feel like we've lost some of that in his projects is that you know, we've got a lot of things overpowering the story is trying to tell, be it moving parts, be it production woes. I was not as big of a fan of Kingdom Hearts 3 as you. I liked Remind a ton, because it reminded me of what I liked the most about Kingdom Hearts. And I even like a lot of the story. I think you know, despite not being in the most, you know, acceptably presentable way, I think, you know, KHUX is really, actually has a really good story. Like, start to finish, really good. If you just take little bits of it, you're probably not going to enjoy it. If you like just look at the ending, independent of the context, you're not going to like it. And that's a big time sink. Like, I'm not saying that everybody should have to do that to enjoy Kingdom Hearts 4, and I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. But
I don't think you have to either.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that it's natural to feel like you're missing out. And like you can tell when you know you're missing data, like you're missing information. Like, I get the gist of this, but I feel like in order to know more, I'm going to have to investigate more. And that can feel a certain kind of way. And so I'm not going to criticize anybody that feels like that's a misstep, especially if you're trying to tell a story visually. I think the game that sort of got me back into this idea that cinematic storytelling, though, is really critical to Final Fantasy is Remake. Because like you said, the visuals in 15 were amazing. Honestly, in a lot of ways, they were better than 7R. Like, really? The engine was really good. Luminous is a really powerful engine, but cinematically, the game was a big loss. Like, you lost all these options to tell this amazing, breathtaking story. There were so few uses of that. Whereas I feel like 7R told a much more visually engaging story, despite like being unable to make a door texture. You know,
and what's more important, right, for the overall story, the door. That's kind of my point. But like, another thing to note is, you know, this is why I got so excited when I heard 7R has a lighting team, and you can see it on when people move the camera on the mods. When each shot changes, there's key lights and bounce lights and everything being moved and changed every single shot in that game, which the camera changes constantly. There's so many shots. And when you look at scenes like Barrett, you know, pounding on the concrete after the plate fall and stuff, it's masterful shot selection, and every single shot is chosen to convey a certain feeling. And you know, you see him, Barrett, the big strong guy, right, like against, and he looks like nothing, like this tiny weakling against this massive pile of rubble. He's powerless, you know. Just one example of the million in there, and it's so well told. And that's why I just watched the Versus 13 trailers before this show.
Yeah.
And it's like, in the space of, I actually counted I think it's less than 10 seconds in the Nox Eterna song trailer, when it shows Noctis and his father. They establish such a relationship between these guys in less than 10 seconds. The shot opens. It's them separated by a massive table. Little Noctis and his dad, Regis. And he's saying like, hey man, you got to eat this stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't taste good. I don't like it. It doesn't like it. And then they're separate. They're so far apart. And in the space of 10 seconds, they keep moving the over the shoulder reversal shots so they get closer in the frame. Like, this is Noctis's head. This is his dad's head. They get closer in the frame, the over the shoulder, till at the end they're almost right next to each other, touching as he accepts what his father says and takes a drink of the soup. It's like, what? In 10 seconds they did all that, like, subconscious visual storytelling that is just, the new games are bereft of that, like even thinking on that level that it matters in any way, apparently. And this is why, again, like, this is just stuff that I love personally too. Like, it doesn't matter for a lot of people, nor is it useful for a lot of people. But and as Ryan knows, this is one of the parts that I struggle with 14. Storytelling is great, but they literally didn't have the tools, especially in ARR, to like tell that level of visual stuff. And that's why I'm probably going to be trying 14 more when they update the graphics, like in the lighting and stuff. It's super exciting.
Well, what I'll say about 14 though is that you know, 14's story is so good that it doesn't need to be told as visually, and that's not to say that, you know, that the story of, like, say, 7R isn't good. 7R's story is good told visually. It's not good on paper. It's not as good on paper. It's a story that's meant to be expressed that way. There are stories that are meant to be expressed in a more episodic or compendium style way, or like, it's always going to be hard to make you know, the brothers Karamazov into something compelling to watch, but it is incredibly compelling to read. And so it's the difference in the way that you tell stories. And there's no way that I can look at that even some of the storytelling visuals and stuff like that work in 7R would even work as well on, like, kind of the sublime level of storytelling that 14 has. And 14 does have some, you know, when it needs to use visual storytelling, it does. You know, it does. So, but not all stories need to be as visual. But where I think Nomura really excels is stories that do. Like, he needs to tell a story that's meant to be told visually. And I think that's part of the pitfall of Kingdom Hearts, is that so much of that story is in lore and books and in quite frankly in you know, games that aren't that visual. You know, for you to really get the depth.
As I always say with Nomura, is like, picture, you know, Kingdom Hearts 3 has a lot of people who always say like the structure of that story, like the ending is awesome, but God, it was crammed in, right? It was all at the end. And you have to ask yourself, it's like, how could it not be? Like, I guess they could have put like a little bit in the midway point, but it's the Disney Worlds. Like, and with he's in interviews saying like the Frozen team is like breathing down his throat, making sure every
100%
is like
100%,
perfect. And the Tangled team is like, you son of a bitch, you got to redo this, and like every single separate Disney studio is like, it has to be approved, it has to be, and that is obviously where most of the budget goes for these games. So it's just like, how could you make a story with like all the, what is it, like the Ansem reports and stuff, right? He probably literally can't work those in. He probably wants to, and they're like, no, sorry, like you need to spend 85% of the time in Disney World, and then you can like work in your cool little fun story you're doing, Nomura. And that's gotta suck, man. That's gotta suck when trying to tie up a several game story in Kingdom Hearts 3 and do Frozen and all these new things.
And that's why I don't generally fault Nomura for that. But at the end of the day, the person that's, one of the parties that suffers is the viewer, is the consumer, is the art critic. And so moving forward with Kingdom Hearts 4, what's going to happen? Ryan.
Right. Yeah. So, I think going into that, it could be the fact that, because I think in comparison to Kingdom Hearts 3, when you compare Kingdom Hearts 1 and especially 2, there was a much, much better flow to Disney Worlds in Kingdom Hearts 2 than in 3. And part of that might honestly be the fact that a lot of the original animators, a lot of people, the original people who worked on the films that were used in Kingdom Hearts 2 aren't still there, like dictating things in quite the same way that, the people who worked on Frozen and Tangled, right? Which allowed them to have more creative freedom, because when you play through like a lot of the Disney worlds in like Kingdom Hearts 2, they're actually a joy to go through, and the cutscenes are fun to watch, right? Like it's just like, it's a blast to go through the Mulan world in Kingdom Hearts 2 and go out there and play through that level. I love that level. I love the way that level is set up. There's a whole bunch of Disney worlds in Kingdom Hearts 2 that I was just like a really big fan of. And then when it came to Kingdom Hearts 3, a lot of that was rehashing those moments through very long cutscenes. I mean, the cutscenes, if you weigh them out, they're tremendously longer and so much slower paced in Kingdom Hearts 3 than they are in Kingdom Hearts 2. And there's a number of, they're very minute, small detail things, but they very much add up in one's enjoyment factor of the Disney worlds, right? And all those things really added up in Kingdom Hearts 3.
Yeah.
And that's where Kingdom Hearts 3's Disney worlds kind of became somewhat of a slog compared to previous games. But honestly, let's also not necessarily pretend like Kingdom Hearts 3 was the genesis of that beginning to happen, because it really started to happen in Birth by Sleep, where that's where the Disney worlds kind of became a little weight down and kind of feeling like, okay, this is, they feel like they're filler in every Kingdom Hearts game, starting with the first one all the way through to the most recent one, right? But it's just like, that's when they became almost intrusive to the story, was really beginning in Birth by Sleep. And then it got a lot worse in Dream Drop Distance, where the entire game was filler except for the beginning and end. And then Kingdom Hearts 3 was like a further manifestation of that issue, right? So it's been an ongoing problem.
And I think is, like, picture, I think it's in like Tangled, you have usually one Organization 13 member in each Kingdom Hearts 3 world. That's it. Which makes you wonder, it's like, God, I wonder if the Disney studios were even like, this is the Tangled world. You can put a little bit of your stuff in there, but this is showcasing Tangled, so people go watch that movie and buy it. So,
right.
So we don't know the limitation. Like maybe he was like, oh, I want to have like Axel and Kyrie. No. You can choose one of your characters, like, because it's very weird. There's just one that kind of show up and they're there, but they're in it for like 2 seconds, and then all the big stuff happens at the end. So like, man, I wonder how much he even had to like choose what he could put in each in intertwined storylines and stuff. It's so. Right. It's a nightmare trying to plan that even.
But then you look at like Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, right?
Yeah.
And that wasn't as big of an issue, especially not in 2, right? where we had organization boss fights at the end of each level, and they're very, very, very memorable boss fights oftentimes. I can still very much remember every single boss that I fought in Kingdom Hearts 2. Now, maybe because I haven't like played through the base game of Kingdom Hearts 3 since it came out, but I really can only remember one or two of the actual bosses that you fight throughout the game, because they were just like these generic heartless that they weren't really tightly designed fights. And again, going back to, because I wanted to touch on this as well when we talk about the accessibility of Kingdom Hearts, because this is always a very hot topic, right? It always comes up on Twitter, and every time it does, someone's getting ratioed, and it's usually the argument of, well, it's all accessible because you can get all the games on one console, which is not quite true. Because you can't get the most important game in the entire story, which is Union Cross. And it is the most important story in the entire series now. And it does have to be consumed in the format that it is. And it's weird too, because as someone who has played every single game in this series, save Union Cross, I just don't want to play it. I just don't want to sit down and read all that stuff. And that's just pretty understandable. I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy XIV, but A Realm Reborn, even though it's free, even though you can download it right now if you have a PC or a PS4, is a lot of text to read. And quite honestly, I don't blame someone if they do play A Realm Reborn and they skip through a lot of it, and then they kind of have to go back and be like, oh, that was relevant to this and this, right? Because it's not so much how easy can you access it, because quite frankly, if you want to do that, 14 is the most accessible mainline title. Anyone with the internet connection in a PS4 or PC or a Mac could go play it, right? But it's the amount of effort that someone has to put in, and that no one seems to factor in. And Kingdom Hearts requires a tremendous amount of effort, is what people don't seem to understand. It's not like, oh yeah, can you go get all the games on one console? Yeah, you can, but it's a tremendous amount of effort. No one wants to fucking play Chain of Memories in 2022. Yeah. I know maybe some of you do. I don't want to play Chain of Memories in 2022. Now, granted, I was fortunate enough to play Chain of Memories back when it came out, so I don't have to do that, right? But like most people don't want to sit through that, or sit through, long cutscene movies of a DS game.
Sure.
One thing I will say,
right?
Simply because it's my own experience. It's the only place I'm speaking of now. So, like, it is possible, at least in that capacity, is I have never seen Union Cross. I'm saving it for a stream. I'm gonna react to it or whatever. But I love Kingdom Hearts. I love the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. It's like, yeah, I didn't know who the girl was, but I could infer everything that was happening besides that from Kingdom Hearts 3 Remind and before. Another confession to make: I have never seen Chain of Memories. Never seen 1 second of it, and I understand everything that happens in it, though, from the later games explaining it. So the other thing to factor in here is that Kingdom Hearts 4 is a new saga. So yes, there's a ton of stuff. Obviously, you're not going to know what happened to Sora in all three of those games, and Riku and Kairi in their journey, but it's a new story. Yeah. Right? It's a new story. So when we hop into Kingdom Hearts 4, which, by the way, thousands upon thousands of people, that will be their first Kingdom Hearts. Haven't seen nothing. It's just going to happen. That people buy stuff, see a trailer and it looks cool. They're going to be able to play it and enjoy it because it's going to have, some semblance of a story, unless they completely drop the ball as a possibility. And there's going to be a ton of new characters. Yozora is pretty much a new character in a blank slate. We've seen him in these, trailers and stuff. So, I mean, it's accessible as far as the whole series. It's an investment, dude. I really don't think you have to do this. I really don't think it's play Kingdom Hearts 1. Yeah. Play whatever. Play the big ones. See what you want to see, or don't. Go enjoy Kingdom Hearts. You certainly can. You certainly can.
The Kingdom Hearts fandom would disagree with that. You gotta play everything.
They were telling me that. So it's funny, when I tweeted that, I think you saw this too, Ryan. The irony of this is I tweeted that, and the reason I said it, I was like, because the visual storytelling, like we just talked about, is so good, and it's so just fun, and the scenes are so well constructed. You can easily infer, because of the shot selection, because of Shimomura's genius music, what's happening. You don't have to be like, but I don't know that guy's backstory. It's like, you can, okay, enjoy the scene. And the Kingdom Hearts fandom, hardcore fandom, was telling me that, no, it sucks. It's terrible. You have to see every single scene to know what's going on. So I'm just like, what?
You
don't like Kingdom Hearts? Like, it's very confusing.
The more complex like a story is, the more variety it has, the greater variety of gatekeeping is going to take place in the community. And there's just nothing that you can do about that. And I think ultimately what it comes down to for me is like, are you interested in Kingdom Hearts? If you were to ask me, should you watch all of Union Cross? And my answer would be yes. Why? Not because I think it's going to really, like, it matters that you know it. I think it probably doesn't necessarily matter. I do think that you will enjoy things more if you don't feel like this. Most people, I enjoy things more if I don't have this sense of uncertainty surrounding it, like this fear of missing out. I enjoy things more that way. But ultimately, the question is it worth it? Like, is it worth it to go through Union Cross? And for me, the answer is yes. I don't know if it's the most, I'm not going to necessarily agree that it's the most important story of the Kingdom Hearts universe right now. I think
it could be, right? We don't know.
I think the most important story of Kingdom Hearts 4 is the one we're talking about right now, which is Versus 13.
Yeah, that's right.
But on its own, Union Cross is a really good story. It's a really, really good story, and I was surprised at how good of a story it is. If you just like, that kind of storytelling, there's a bunch of heartbreak and wholesomeness, and like the way that it connects to the rest of the Kingdom Hearts universe is very secondary to just the quality of the story, in my opinion. But the warning I have about that is that don't take it out of context. Like, don't take little pieces of the story to try and like piece together what's happening and other things, because it is a really broken experience that way. But that being said, I don't think that that's a good way forward for the series. I think that whatever happens in Kingdom Hearts 4, I'm hoping that they take a little bit of this, of the, pretty substantial amounts of criticism they got, and look at what's working. Like, I hope Nomura is looking at what's working with his storytelling, what people like about his storytelling. And that's that, he has these tight, context-heavy, visual stories that he can tell with tight editing and really, like the amount of information conveyed in a single scene, in a single 2 to 3 minutes in, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake versus Kingdom Hearts 3 is pretty astonishing. Like,
it's
the
monumental.
Density of information in 7R really ought to be, the mark that they're going for, instead of what happens in Kingdom Hearts 3. And what we saw of Kingdom Hearts 4 so far gives me a lot of confidence about that. Like,
absolutely.
Like, that is not a pre-rendered trailer.
Nope.
That was Unreal Engine. So this is the kind of storytelling they're telling in game. And that's really important to me, because I think for Nomura, that's what works best for him.
Yeah.
Personally.
Well, listen, what's today's topic? Versus 13. I saw someone in chat say, I think it was Tenebrae Queen, Kingdom Hearts, like, you feel it. You don't need, like, it's more, you feel it as an experience. And that's so much of what Kingdom Hearts is, like that kind of that heart, that poetry of what he's saying is super abstract, ideas, speaking in stilted language and stuff. It's almost like Shakespearean. That it's so weird. Like nobody talks like this, in Shakespeare or Kingdom Hearts. But it's like this beautiful poetic, view on life and like philosophy and everything. But you feel that, and that's my point with. It would appear to me the people who seem to enjoy Kingdom Hearts the most. Note, I didn't see the biggest fans. From my Twitter experience the other day, it seems the biggest fans do not enjoy it as much. But people who like love Kingdom Hearts for what it is seem to feel it. And guess what the Versus 13 trailers are, guys? Did we know any details? No. There's not even speaking. And we're sitting here still today raving about the feeling of that he was able to convey with the visual language. So that's kind of my point is I will continue to love Kingdom Hearts, and I'm sure people will, try 4 out and be yelled at in their Twitch chats and stuff. Like, you need to play the other game. Stop by like the hardcore Kingdom Hearts fans, and it'll be one of their favorite games because they can just enjoy the feeling of that franchise.
Sure.
And that's kind of my point. Is Versus 13 is all feeling. We didn't know anything. We didn't have to go back and read the lore, to like those trailers.
I watch those trailers so often looking for information, and I think that's part of the deal. Is like I can watch. There's this thing that I got I got actually a shit ton of slack for this last episode. Is that if you look at some stories, you're looking at it and you're like, I know I can. And it's not just that I feel it. There's so much information being conveyed here that there's stories being told with every frame, like just the backdrop and stuff like that. And it's incredibly rich. And so what Versus 13 was selling us was that I bet there's an incredible story behind every single thing we're seeing. And I haven't felt that in Kingdom Hearts until the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. Honestly. Okay. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. What's the expression? Feels over reels?
Yeah.
That tends to be what Kingdom Hearts is a lot of the times. It's feelings, but then those feelings don't tend to actually be necessarily grounded in my opinion, and necessarily always something that's like necessarily deep or real. But KH4 kind of turned that around for me. Like KH4 is probably the most I've felt something looking at something Kingdom Hearts since Kingdom Hearts 2. So that means it's been roughly a decade and a half for me since I've felt something so strongly. And I was looking at the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer for the first time, and I just felt like a kind of like a sense of joy rushing over me when I watched it. I was like, "Oh, this is cool. This is cool, man. This actually puts me back in the mind state, in the mood that I felt like, kind of has been missing for me for a long time with the series, and I felt something inspired here, something that is rooted within something real. And I think it is rooted in something real. I think it's rooted in Nomura's pain. Like, really, yeah. I think it's rooted in his real, like, real feelings, his emotional pain of losing something that he spent 7 years. You guys know how long 7 years is to work on something?
Sure.
I've been working on videos. I've been making videos for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So I've been a content creator for 5 years. So basically, everything I've done so far in my career, plus 2 more fucking years.
Yeah. Imagine they're just like, hey, Philip Hartshorn is going to take over your channel now. Sorry. It's going to be your channel's going to say run by Philip Hartshorn, all your work.
Yeah. And he's going to talk about how much 14 sucks. My creative vision completely destroyed, completely obliterated, right? Like, but that's
what happened to him.
Right. But that's mostly what it is. I cannot fathom I cannot fathom the pain of working on something for 7 years, and not only working on it for that long, but having to deal with so many other people's BS for that long. The corporate politics, Crystal Tools failing, 14 1.0 failing, so people from your staff had to be pulled off in order to make a Rome reborn. All of these other tremendously terrible issues happening in the background. Company bleeding money, all these things preventing you. All the meanwhile, you're steady the course, working on it. You can't even work on Kingdom Hearts 3. This other thing that people are expecting on you, this big thing, because you're so busy working on this one project. And he even mentions in one of the old Versus 13 interviews that one of the reasons he was excited to work on Versus 13 was because he wanted to get away from working on Kingdom Hearts for a little while.
Yeah.
And he mentioned he said something
about that.
Yeah, he said something cheesy in an interview, but it was like, perhaps I've been in the world of light for too long. He made some kind of like cheesy joke like that in the interview. And it was just like, so this was his chance, because he had been working on Kingdom Hearts from basically like 1999, like 2000-ish, all the way to about 2005 or 6. So he had been doing nothing for like the past 6 years, 7 years, but working on nothing but Kingdom Hearts stuff. So he finally got an opportunity to work on something that was not Kingdom Hearts, and he's very enthusiastic to be able to do that. And he worked on it for 7 years, and he was constantly refining it, and he felt like Versus was like his magnum opus. And not being able to deliver something that you feel like was truly authentically the best work you've ever done in your life, and not being able to release it, and then not worse than not being able to release it, not even being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
You can't even tell the people who were the millions of people who are greatly anticipating this. You cannot say a word to them. You can't even mention the thing even existed.
Those are kicking the nuts, man. Yeah.
I cannot fathom how painful that is. And to me, the coolest thing about Kingdom Hearts 4 really is that he's drawing on that experience to create new art that's inspired by that. And because of that, I really do think this is probably going to be the best Kingdom Hearts game since Kingdom Hearts 2. And I think it'll be universally agreed upon that this is either like the first or second best Kingdom Hearts game, because it is going to be so deeply inspired by something that is real, something
it's also a reset too. Like that's what's got to be so. Imagine go through that corporate hell for like 10 years with like president changes or CEO changes and all this stuff happening, internal politics, and then like them saying when they're deciding to make the 13 trilogy instead of letting you finish your game, by the way, just we'll get you that budget eventually. Oh, we're gonna make Lightning Returns now. Sorry, here's another game coming. Push that budget back until one day, years later, that he goes to that meeting and they're like, yeah, we're putting you on Kingdom Hearts and Tabata's gonna finish it. What?
They had said something. Speaking of which, God, I just remembered it right now. This is unsourced. This is something that happened with Lightning Returns a while back. Babyseal, hopefully you remember this, because I feel like I might be gaslighting myself and remembering it. This might be based on rumor or not fact, but I want to say there was something about Versus 13 assets being used in Lightning Returns, or something similar to that.
I vaguely remember it. It's been a while.
I vaguely remember that too.
It was at least the team. It was at least the team. Probably both though.
Yeah, there was something about like, or it was either that or the version of Crystal Tools that they had attuned for Versus 13 being used in Lightning Returns to support the larger environments.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people say, like, why didn't Versus 13 get further along? It's like, dude, they kept taking people off his team for like every what do you think he can do? Just like make a game by himself? So That's gotta be so frustrating too.
That and specification wise, Crystal Tools could not have ran with Versus 13 like wanted to be.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that they ran into with like Final Fantasy 14, right, is that you can't do dynamic day-night cycles on Crystal Tools, something that was very integral to Versus 13 and something that you obviously need in an MMORPG as a day-night cycle, right? And so because it couldn't actually do those day-night cycles and transition the lighting, the way that like 14's nighttime actually works in 1.0, that is that it was actually like daytime but with like a blue tint, like a dark blue tint.
Wild.
And that's basically how they made like nighttime work in 14 1.0.
Madness. So I'm gonna start taking audience questions as we kind of wind down here. So if you guys want to be sure and tag us, actually just tag me so for visibility in the chat. And on the topic of 13, 13 was probably seen as one of the biggest. It's the one that I hear the most complaints about. I hear everything in the 13 universe being, kind of universally trashed. I actually really enjoyed 13.2. I think 13.2 is easily the best part of the series by far. Type Zero was okay.
Was a solo game would be like a cool JRPG that everybody would like.
It'd be great. A lot of the concepts were really strong. It even used things like time travel and time loops in a non-grading way. It actually used them for dramatic effect, like the concept of Caius and Noel was really good. It had really good use of emotional music and stuff like that. It felt more like a Final Fantasy title than the other two in the series, as a matter of fact. Do you think that it ended up being a secret blessing, perhaps, that Versus 13 has separated from the legacy of 13?
Yes.
Yes.
At the same time, no. And let me explain, because there's a universe out there where all those business decisions weren't made, and they were just like, when Clark walked into that theater at you said it was E3, right? There's a universe where that just continued as planned, and we got 13 and Versus 13 for the PS3. And today would have known Nomura's whole vision, and it was just invested in and put out. So looking back now, I wish we just got that, honestly. I wish it was even PS3 instead of like became FF15 and stuff, because we could have got the story. We could have got the vision. So that's kind of my stance. What do you think, man?
13.2 was a great game.
Yeah.
13.2 was a phenomenal game. And as you guys know, having played through all 15 mainline titles, the original 13 is my least favorite of all 15 games. But I really do like 13.2. Like, a lot of people wanted me to put it on my tier list. If I did, I'd probably put it like very high B tier, maybe even A. That's how much I enjoyed 13.2. And I feel like if 13.2 was 13.1 in a sense, that nobody really would have been upset by 13. It probably would have been called one of the better Final Fantasies if they went into 13 with the same mindset as 13.2. And that is giving the player a little bit more freedom, having some better level design, having a villain that makes sense and actually has like relatable human emotions, who's voiced by like Liam O'Brien. So he has like that
great voice,
bassy, that great bassy voice, like that Kane Hyman voice that's like really commanding and feels like really intimidating, but also kind of like elusive and mysterious too. It's really interesting, and the way that Noel and Caius, like their story, very emotional.
They're dynamic.
Ready to kill me, Noel.
Yeah.
God, I love that scene where where Caius is like prepping Noel to like be able to kill him and take the heart of chaos and like restart time, or there's just like a lot of like human emotion present in 13 too, in the way that it's delivered. It just ain't there in 13.
Yeah,
that's a whole other tangent I could go on.
And
such a basic story too. 13 too, basic human emotions, and then 13 is such a weird like alien. What?
And
falsi, post falsi. It's like what are these terms?
And I think we've talked about this a little off stream, and then I'm gonna answer some questions. Is that where Final Fantasy can sometimes get rough is when you get all of these people, these creatives that really ought to be working on their own projects, are forced into the same project together. And then you see this collision of really big ideas, and then it can become this convoluted nightmare. And that's what I felt with 13. Is it's like, because despite some opinions, I think Toriyama is actually really he has really good scenarios that he makes, and I think once Nomura was pulled from 13, it got really good. And then it got bad again with Lightning Returns, when somebody like said, "Hey, you've got a year, make another game. It's going to be really short and nonsense," and that's what we got. But I think the 13.2 was just one person's sort of whole concept, and had little sprinklings of somebody else's, instead of a bunch of creatives being forced in the same room together and say, "Hey, make a good story together." Like, that doesn't always work. And companies that on the top level can manage those resources can really be effective at making good projects. And so that's why I try and have a tendency to avoid criticizing Toriyama or Nomura or Tabata, is because I think it's pretty clear they're all really creative people. It's just, you've got to really manage how they work together, and that's Square Enix's job, ultimately. I have a really good question from my good friend Tatsumaki, who's been a guest on the show a couple of times, and just one of my favorite variety streamers in the world. He says, question, how much do you want to see carried over to Verum Rex KH4, and how much are you hoping for more of a one-to-one or general themes and ideas? What could make you upset with its execution? And Brian, start.
Oh man. I kind of want to answer like the last question first. I don't think that too much can make me upset with the execution relative to Kingdom Hearts, honestly, right? Because Kingdom Hearts is like, brand wise, it's just gotten so wacky to the point of where I'm really just paying for cutscenes with Pete in it. I really like Pete, and I really like Goofy.
Based Pete.
Yes. I know, fucking based Pete. Like, I love Pete. I love Goofy. As long as they're in there somewhere, I'm gonna be okay. In terms of like what I want to see carry over from Verum Rex, or like, I guess like the concept of like versus, I think I just really want to see those brilliant ideas from like those trailers kind of like manifest in a game. It won't have obviously the same effect that it was intended to have, but I think that it'll be really interesting to actually see that in an actual game and be delivered in some way, just because as Philip would probably say, cinematically it would be just a shame to have all those ideas and all that passion just die and not be used in something, right? In terms of like the themes and ideas, though, that I really want to see him double down on and really make interesting, really make powerful. Death seems to be at the core of all of this, and it seems to be really important. And the way death ties into the concept of sleep, and the sleep sort of being like death, or whatever metaphor that he's made before. I want to see those ideas, and I want to see how they tie into what he's trying to do here. because I also find it interesting. Like this is like I think the most powerful metaphor that Nomura has ever created, and I don't say this lightly, obviously, because I have very up and down feelings about a lot of his creative work, and especially within the past decade. But I think that reality, because Sora comes from a kind of anime world, so I think that reality, being the world of the dead, is kind of a really interesting statement, right?
It's powerful commentary about the juxtaposition between dreams and inspiration and the real grounded secular world. And there's a ton of interesting stuff that can be told about that. I think that my answer to the question is how they can really ruin this, what they can do is make it secondary. I want them to lean in really hard. I want Quadratum to be really where the game takes place. Not like a small segment and then they're just off flying around in gummy ships and then going to Disney worlds. They can go to other worlds. I want them to go that, but I do not want this to not be the central theme and core. So I want the Versus 13 world, the Viramex world, to be the real world and the basis for what all of this comes from. So,
and you know what? I think that, and I guarantee you, I'm calling this right now. He's gonna announce it probably in the next interview that the actual flow of the game is gonna be different in this one. And I think that you're going to spend a lot more time in Quadratum than you would have in, say, like any other Kingdom Hearts games hub world like Twilight Town, which Twilight Town is kind of like the one that you spend the most amount of time in out of all of them. But and the reason I think that is because constructing a large metropolitan city in a video game is an insanely expensive thing to do. It's kind of why they don't like to do towns too often in a lot of games. You guys remember that infamous Toriyama interview where HD towns are too hard to make? Oh my god, that interview was infamous, notorious back in the day.
What?
But there is some truth to it, right? And that is presenting like those massive HD towns. Like any game where you play in like a big metropolitan area, what you'll notice is that you spend the majority, if not the whole game there, because creating that big city is really expensive and time consuming to do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I mean, look at Remake, for example, right? They went from HD towns are too hard to the whole game is literally an HD town.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to spend a crap ton of time in Quadratum.
Yeah.
And I think that the world flow for Kingdom Hearts 4 is going to be fundamentally different than any Kingdom Hearts game. And I think it's going to be 1000% for the better.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And
I agree with you guys both. Like to see those ideas die, like Ryan said, would be such a tragedy because we still haven't gotten Nomura doing like his own full original idea. Versus was going to be the only thing. Obviously, Kingdom Hearts isn't because of Disney, and obviously 7 Remake like is the closest thing we have. Like I just tweeted this thing earlier, which was like an interview by Nomura in '97 saying like, yeah, he made the base story and the characters with Sakaguchi as I always say, and people yell at me. And besides that, like what has he been able to do like from scratch? And that's why I think a new saga in Kingdom Hearts is so cool. And him being finally able to just get some of these ideas on paper, man, or like executed fully, is going to be so good.
An aside on that tweet that you just mentioned. And there was a question about this earlier regarding the things in Crisis Core that didn't make the final cut from subtext. And part of a community called the Shinra Archaeology Department, and the Strife is Rife is the one that put out that recent translation of that interview from Dismantled, which a lot of people argue the canonicity of some of the statements in Dismantled, but you can't really argue with interviews. Like these are the words of Nomura. So a lot of that stuff is coming out, and it will be coming out over the next few weeks out of a couple of those Twitter accounts, and it'll all find a compendium home that you guys can all visit, and all be sure to be posting links and stuff like that. And some of that stuff about Crisis Core is in that list. So just to answer that question, subtext, there's a ton, way more than I can talk about in a single sentence or episode. So just, I will probably do a archaeology episode coming up soon with some of the Shinra archaeology guys. And then I did want to mention that something that Tatsu is also bringing up is that there is a little bit of confusion about whether or not there's going to be more than one Kingdom Hearts game that's dealing with Quadratum. And it does appear that there is going to be sort of a game that's centered around Virum Rex, that isn't Kingdom Hearts 4. That's probably just going to be called Kingdom Hearts, or it's going to probably just be called Virum Rex. And
non-clarity on that, but essentially it was debated whether he was saying he was trying to decide what to call Kingdom Hearts 4. He wanted to name it Virum Rex, and they were like, no, because nobody would know that's Kingdom Hearts 4. But then it was also inferred, like, wait, is he saying he wanted to make a different game called Virum Rex, like about?
Well, so that was okay. To clarify, that was Nomura's statement. Nomura said that he had almost called Kingdom Hearts 4 Virum Rex. Another developer has mentioned that there are more than one project. One of them is Virum Rex. So it is still very likely that there is a something within the continuity of Kingdom Hearts that isn't Kingdom Hearts, maybe centered around Yozora and maybe centered around those stories, that's going to come out as a side thing. What that is, we're still really unclear. But that's fine.
And,
yeah. So
I had a couple Kingdom Hearts fans mad at me because I said I was a little bit more interested in that.
And
say it was
not
okay.
that I wasn't interested in Kingdom Hearts 4. I was just like, I really want to know about Yozora.
Well, what's interesting is that in Kingdom Hearts 4, the trailer, we are seeing Sora in that world, but it's still clearly Sora. Like, it's not Yozora. It's not like Sora is the replacement for Noctis. So Yozora getting his own story in this is still important. Once again, Dylan Sprouse is chosen as the actor, and that's a big deal.
It's a Hollywood actor. It's not like that's a bigger actor than, like, technically speaking, than like Cloud and Sephiroth. So it's
much bigger. Yeah, much bigger.
Yeah.
Big deal. And also, I think the nature of these characters is very different. But we see that Sora, like, and I'll tell you, I still get goosebumps thinking about that trailer when you're in this, like, real life city. You're in a place I've actually been in Tokyo. Like, I've been on that street, and this giant Heartless comes, and you see real people running from it in actual terror. And, like, I started to, like, tear up a little bit when I see, like, still small, but like a child, like, like a teenage Sora running towards it fearlessly. And then, it's like, I see danger, I'm going to fight danger. That's different than Yozora. Like, that is not the characterization we had of Yozora. Yozora, I think, is still going to be, the true king. There's going to be this complexity to Yozora that we're going to see. So I think it is important that they still get their own stories. But, so we're talking about all of that here. Even if Yozora's story isn't told in Kingdom Hearts 4, we're talking about, the possibility that Versus 13 gets told through Virum Rex. If it got its own whole project, that would be nuts. Yeah.
What's interesting is that I guess I forgot. Never mind. I was going somewhere really. I know what I was gonna say now. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I blanked out for a second. The Star Scourge in
Radon?
Final Fantasy. What? No, That would be base though. Where Don just shows up in Kingdom Hearts 4 and just Sora has to fight him. But the Star Scourge was a bigger deal in Versus 13 than it was probably in 15, and how 15 kind of brushed it aside all the way to the end. It's kind of one of those ideas that were like left over from the original. And I'm thinking that the Star Scourge is going to manifest in Kingdom Hearts 4. This is where my big brain theory comes in. Very, very large gray matter here. So buckle up.
Yeah.
I think that the Star Scourge here is going to be a thing, and it's going to be some kind of Kingdom Hearts BS, like darkness manifesting in people's hearts, turning them into like heartless and nobodies. And it'll basically be a giant allusion to Star Scourge.
Nice. I'd be down.
Yeah. I'm thinking that that's what it's going to be, right? Because look at the people's reaction in that trailer to seeing that giant heartless. They never seen anything like that before, right?
Yeah.
You don't take out your phone and put that on your story, because that's what that guy was doing. He was like,
I love that. Before he runs, I thought that was the most realistic part of the trailer. It's like, he took a picture before you ran.
Yeah. That was a great detail. I really like that, right?
Yeah.
And that he felt the need to, like, capture that moment because it was so surreal. Obviously, that indicates to me they aren't used to having heartless in their world. Obviously, it's a more realistic world, so they, naturally speaking, they wouldn't have that sort of issue there. And so I think that either with Sora coming there or with whoever coming there has sort of brought this thing into their world, this concept of darkness. And I feel like it's going to infect their world in a sort of way, just like the Star Scourge. And it'll be a huge deal that maybe even the premise of the entire plot. Because if I'm the writer, that to me, that would be like the premise, or like the central conflict, or how I drive the mystery, really, is that darkness has sort of infected like this real world, and now it's turning these people into heartless and nobodies and etc. Kingdom Hearts, villainry. And more or less, you have to stomp this darkness. And then also, I think that kind of ties back into some thematic themes too, about kind of the realm of the dead being real life.
I love that. That's super cool.
I do too. And I think it doubles up on the idea that the realm of dead is quadratum, which means square, which also might be, a bit of a meta commentary for Nomura, looking at, looking at his higher ups, and also making a sort of commentary there as well, right? So,
yeah, it's I can't wait.
It's
just a new slate, like we said, right? That's why I'm excited for a new project. It's a clean slate, but he gets to take his favorite characters, right? Like Sora, not Noctis, like Yozora, and tell the story that he wants to. It's exciting. And like Luke Skywalker too. It's gonna be awesome.
Isn't it interesting to think about who will be accompanying Sora in this game, right? Because he's not gonna have Donald and Goofy.
I want him to. I want him to like update their aesthetic to be realistic and just like terrifying. Like, I want us to face the reality of what a talking duck would look like in real. A giant talking duck and a giant talking dog. And I want him to just be like those pictures you see of like real life Mickey, like those bizarre, or like real life Mario paintings. I want it to be that level of creepy. And just like, you're like, oh, like every time you like pan the camera around, you see one, it like startles you. That's what I want.
Sonic movie before they fixed the Sonic movie.
That's dark stuff.
Look,
that'd be great.
I know that's a great question, and I mean, there's a lot to go into on that, and because you really got to kind of know Kingdom Hearts lore, and I think that Dave Not Important brought up something that is good. He clarified that it was a mistranslation that Kingdom Hearts Insider updated. Nomura said he couldn't decide on what to do. Viram Rex or KH4 first, and they decided to make KH4 first because it made sense to people and were worried about what would happen with Sora. So there was a I don't know, I guess a mistranslation going around saying that he didn't know what to call the project, but it was really just which project to make first. So both projects are for sure being made. And then as far as the actual lore stuff, Tatsu has a theory. Says, I think the Heartless show up to Quadratum because Sora and Strelitzia are there. They're both Keyblade wielders, and the Heartless chase down those with Keyblade no matter where they go, since the Keyblade is the only thing that can actually get rid of them. We also know that Riku's there at some point. We also know that a lot of the robed figures are there, and it's very likely some of them might have Keyblades. It's unclear if the Lost Master is the Master of Masters and what the Master of Masters has brought into reality. There's a ton of stories they can tell there. Let's see.
I think it'd be funny though.
Yeah.
If it was Sora, Riku, and like 2 other guys.
That would be hilarious. Yeah,
I know.
Wouldn't it? And that's kind of what I could see happening, right? Is that it being Sora, Riku, and like 2 other guys. And I kind of made this prediction on the Frustrated Jacob stream that I did, but I feel like we'll probably see a scene where Sora and Kairi have a fight in reference to Versus 13.
I think we will see that scene. Okay, so that scene in the trailers, what we're talking about is that there is this about to be a showdown on the street in the Versus 13 trailer between Noctis and Stella. And that looked like it was going to be the dramatic apex of the game. I mean, it looked so cool. Yeah. It looked so much more cool than literally anything that happened in Final Fantasy 15. And I would love to see that scene created or reproduced somehow in either Kingdom Hearts 4 or Virum Rex. It seems more likely
a lot of emotional weight too.
Yeah,
like they have a long history and they're just kind of like expressing their feelings to each other recently and stuff. That would be very sad.
But if it's Kairi or not, I mean, and who Strelitzia is it Data Strelitzia? There's all sorts of like lore theories that are going around that are convoluted nonsense that could drag this down into oblivion. But the idea of using those really beautiful concepts from the Versus 13 trailers and putting them into Kingdom Hearts 4 or Virum Rex, I don't think it's a matter of if. I think it's a matter of how. Like, which characters does that fit with? And I think it probably does fit a little bit more with Yozora and maybe some other character than it does with Sora and somebody, because Sora is different. Sora, like we said, there's a real difference between what motivates Sora and what motivated Noctis. In the characterization, it was very edgy.
There's something like, and this is I think one of the biggest tragedies of 15 again is I think it might have been the 2011 one. It's one of the trailers, but I think it's a gameplay centric trailer. But it ends. And you have now we know obviously it's after Noctis's father is dead, and they murdered him in the throne or in the signing ceremony or whatever was going to happen. And then you have Noctis sitting on the throne, and he stands up and he says to Ignis, he's like, "We're gonna kill them all. We're gonna 10 times the revenge. We're gonna reap on them." And and then Ignis is like, "Let's make it 100 times." And like there's no smile. There's no. He walks out like he's gonna murder people. I think that is one of the coolest scenes to this day. And I'm like, what?
And then they get cup noodle.
Yeah. And the one is like, let's
then they get caught up in the Assassin's Creed universe. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Great game, lots of fun, but I mean that was completely lost. That just like I don't even know what to call it, just like deep revenge story. In the new one, he like complains for 10 seconds about his father's death and then doesn't really comment too much on it.
he's
until the end.
deeply apathetic about being the king. You know, just
Yeah.
like, yeah, and I mean, like, you know, things like, you know, and this goes back to an earlier point where we were talking about like the depth of emotional storytelling and why this feels like it's something different and authentic. It's not just that you can sense that he's got a lot of personal feelings wrapped up into the composition of the game. Like, you can sense that, but that is more a feeling thing. Like, literally the way that things are conveyed, like just in a pure information sense, the amount of information we're being conveyed lets us know that there's a really deep amount of lore in every square inch of the story being told. And in Final Fantasy 15, I will never forget the feeling of like Luna, what happens to Luna, and then, you know, Noctis wakes up sad. There's that whole experience, and like, I just remember feeling like, oh man, that's sad. And then like snapping out of it going, why was that sad? Why am I sad? Like,
Yep.
I don't even remember, why am I sad? Oh yeah, okay, I'm not that sad anymore. And then I wasn't sad anymore.
You were
Like-
sad for a second because Visual Works did a cool scene.
Yeah,
When
and
she was,
that's
like thinking and said, and that's it. Yeah.
that's it. And where I feel like all of the Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and all the legacy of Kingdom Hearts and all that stuff will lend itself to the ability to tell this story better is that if there's sadness, if there's pain, we're going to be able to connect to it on a much more than surface level. You know, as a result of all that information and lore that's being told. So, you know, I think there's a real value there. Yeah.
That's a big question too, is like, you know, we just talked about that sort of revenge thing, and then the bringing certain parallels from those trailers in. The interesting thing is Yozora is referred to as Commander in this by, what's his name? Luxord, right? And it's like, interesting. Is something going to happen to his father and everything? Because really what Versus was clearly supposed to be was, you know, it was more along the lines of like Hamlet feel, where it's like him trying to take back his country, you know, homecoming, take back his throne for his father and everything, which is such a cool story. And it was also harped that it was going to be, you know, speaking of Hamlet, they used the Hamlet quote, "Nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so," in the Versus 13 trailers. And it's like, that is not in 15 at all. In the Arden DLC, they tried to play with that a little bit, but it was too late. Retroactively to, like, you know, make that apparent in the overall story. And I wonder like how he would, you know, to make that the moniker of like the entire Versus 13 first trailer. Very clearly, very important. Like Noctis is not 100% good, and I think a lot of that was probably his heart is set on revenge, and he's going to kill a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I
because
wonder how that'll materialize. You know?
yeah, because there's definitely no nothing is either good or bad within like 15. Noctis is definitely on the side of right and Niflheim wrong. there's just no doubt about it, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There really wasn't. Honestly, there kind of like wasn't any like real depth with Niflheim like whatsoever. They were kind of just cartoonishly villainy, and it was kind of like left there. And there was never like any sort of like real explanation for what that villainy, why they were like that, what they were doing, right?
Yeah, and
Just
if it
kind
was,
of
it
that
was
art
very like not visually presented. It was like, you know, buried somewhere or whatever. I don't even remember.
Visually presented, not presented at all. My God.
Yeah. It wasn't there.
It just wasn't there. In fact, I mean, we didn't even get Arden's backstory until like chapter like 13, and then he kind of like briefly told it in like 3 minutes with no visual aids.
Yep.
And then at the end, you get a little bit of it from Talcott and like Ignis, and them telling you what happened. But you're kind of just like, whoa, okay. And I remember when I first played it and I first got to the ending, I was kind of just like, I remember my heart just kind of sank into my chest, and I was just like, "Oh no!" I was like, "Oh no! Don't tell me this is the end." I was like, "Don't tell me it ends here." And that was pretty heartbreaking feeling for me because I was very enthusiastic, going into this game. Like you got to remember, the name Night Sky Prince actually comes before the game released.
Yeah.
It comes from the long anticipation. I often think about like how ironic that is that my channel is kind of built off the name that kind of like was going from being very excited about something to me being actually kind of disappointed without and like how that's like literally kind of the name, the premise of like my entire channel.
Yeah,
That haunts me to this day.
And of Noctis as a character.
Yeah, which and what's interesting though is that I still like Noctis. I still like him in 15, quite a lot actually. And I think I like the idea of what he was going to be in Versus a little bit more.
Yeah,
because I think 15 just drops that ball too many places with this character. Like his father dies, but it's never a big deal. He never really sits and thinks about his father. There's a moment when like the car gets wrecked, and then like that's when. And I guess that alone made me find it very disingenuous when like Luna Freya died. There's a girl that he's only like really met like twice, kind of, and I mean not even really twice, mostly just once, and then again later on. And he completely loses it over her. But his own father, he was supposed to have a great relationship with. He's just kind of like, yeah, I'll get over it.
His own father and the genocide of his kingdom.
Yeah, like his entire entire home, and he's being pursued by Niflheim. They want to kill him.
Yep.
And he's just
fishing. He goes fishing.
Yeah, boy, I love fishing, and
that's what I'm saying. Imagine that original story where it was they escaped from the city, not the Knicks, which the movie was fun, but there's no connection to the main story. And then they escape, and then it's like we're hell bent on revenge road trip to kill them all and take back the kingdom. We're just having a fun road trip.
That's what I can't understand. Why create Knicks? Why create that story? And if you're going to make a separate film anyway, that's going to be required for you to consume in order for you to get the rest of the story, just have it be Noctis. Just have it be Noctis. And then, and that's why, and God knows I don't want to get into this territory, but that's why that even in those scenes, there are scenes with Noctis, with Nyx and Luna that just seem like, tonally, it makes so much more sense if this was Noctis and not Nyx.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Because they almost have a potentially romantic undertone to them. Or they could have had a romantic undertone to them, and it would have worked so much better. And then you would have actually went into the game invested in their relationship, because you would have been like, they were so fucking cute in the movie. Now I can't wait to see how their story turns out in the game. And then Luna's death would have had impact. But then they
well, and imagine for the four guys too. Instead of pushing a broke down car, it's they escape and they fight to the death to escape the city. Try to save his dad, don't make it. Noctis goes apeshit, kills all those soldiers like the trailer. They make their escape barely. Like, it would have been one of the best openings ever. As I always say, that's how every Final Fantasy opens, escaping a city. It's literally just the formula. And they took it out, put it in the movie. That would have been great.
But ultimately, to me, no matter which way you want to look at it, how they could have done the movie or any of that other stuff, the thing that defies all logic for me personally with that idea is that if you have the budget and the manpower, why are you making a movie to begin with that isn't even going to have that big of a profit margin on it, and probably didn't?
There's no way.
Why? Yeah. I imagine that film was made with the goal of breaking even. That's what I think that they made that film with in mind. I feel like their idea was to break even on the cost of making the film. But I cannot understand personally why even choose to make the film? It could have literally made like a 30-minute to an hour-long opening cutscene, even if you wanted to, which may not have been received
I've
well.
thought about it so much that would have been a 6-hour at least like intro for the game. The whole escape from Lucius would have been a massive intro, and then when you come out of it, guess what it is, guys? It's Midgar. You know the whole main
It's
cast.
open world.
You know who the villains are. You know exactly what's happening, and we're chasing down the villain like Sephiroth. We're on our journey. We have a clear goal. It's the first act of the story, which was removed.
Right.
Yeah.
Open, like what?
Right.
Okay, it's like a chill road trip.
Right. And then they want the return to Insomnia to be a big deal, but it's like, my brother in Christ, the return to Insomnia can't be a big deal if I never was there in the first place.
Right. And it's all dark and lame when you get there, and you can't really wander around it, and it's the world of ruin version of it. Is like, oh great, I get to go to Bizarro Insomnia. How fun. At least I got to go to fake Venice along the way. Okay, so we're nearing wrap up time. So I'm there are a couple of good questions that just came in here at the end. So I'm gonna
please
pick two. I'm gonna say so. Kino Tubbs asks, how do we think about Sora's new design? And just a quick answer: it's awesome. Okay, you guys
love it. It's fantastic. Yeah. Modern, sleek, it's cool, it's more real.
At first, I kind of hated it. It grew on me, though. I like it now, but I didn't like it at first. The reason I didn't like it at first was because, like, when I think Sora, I think about, like, the kind of, like, the baggy shorts and, like, the colors and all that other stuff, the kind of, like, semi-crazy design. And then I was just like, this is just Noctis' silhouette again. This is the third Noctis that he's created for this continuity. But it grew on me because I think tonally, it's probably the only thing that makes sense. So
when he woke up and I saw him, I'm like, but when we see him running, and he runs by adults. And there's still like a head hide over him, and he's still like Sora running at him. I'm like, nailed it. That's how I felt about it.
It's great because, you know, everyone in reality is gonna think he's just a giant weeaboo.
Yeah.
Wow.
At least it's in Japan.
Yeah. This weeb got jumps, bro. This weeb is floaty as fuck. Okay. So I just triggered a ton of people. So
that word.
Yeah, you can't say floaty. I just said floaty. Fight me. I don't care. Come at me. Okay. So and then here's our final question. And that is for all three of us, and we'll start with Philip, then go to Ryan. What's the number one thing you want to get out of Kingdom Hearts 4?
Oh man, what's the number one thing? I would say my word of the day: a clear vision, a strong, clear vision that is able to be executed cleanly throughout. And I mean that what I was saying earlier about, you know, Disney having him focus so hard on Frozen, Tangled, and stuff. I would love to see a clear vision that is actually less dispersed than Kingdom Hearts in the past. Imagine if there was just like a couple worlds, and it was like Star Wars, but a bunch of Star Wars. Like maybe we see Mando, maybe we see obviously Endor, episode 5 or 6. Maybe we see whatever, like maybe it's just somewhere very, like maybe you go to Star Wars and you can go to different planets,
right,
and see like different people. Like I would love to see a more focused thing. And then because one of the reasons Kingdom Hearts can't ever do it is, like I said, in Kingdom Hearts 3, how are you gonna have all organization members in the same scene, but then like why are they in every world? It doesn't make any sense. Like how are you gonna achieve this kind of cohesive cast if you're all over the place? Then you have to introduce a whole new cast for 3 hours and then delete them from the story every time with Disney. So I would love to see him able to utilize these the camera to utilize these that's the mic drop, I'm out. These Versus 13 ideas clearly. And a lot of that is going to be the freedom of Disney. It's just a fact. Like even Kingdom Hearts 2, I think that the series has gotten more, but less well told since Kingdom Hearts 1. That's always been my view on it because it's such a simple, clean story. That was a funny pun to say right there. But, it's such a clean story because it's just a guy trying to find his friends again. That's it. That's the whole story. And there's this beautiful scene at the end, and it's like so emotional because it's so simple. As it got to include more cast of characters, that's the only challenge is trying to make them all relevant with the Disney worlds and where are they? How are we putting them in the same room? So I think the beauty of this reset is he's in a different place, and we've got a new cast of characters, Yozora, this and that, and we can have Riku, Kairi, and the others. But I think there's going to be that's what I want to see. Less is more, like Kingdom Hearts 1, but even less than that. Let's just have a focused, clear vision, and maybe some more Final Fantasy focus as well, like with characters.
I think for me, other than getting like a drop of Versus 13 out of this, I think what I really want to see with Kingdom Hearts 4 is them finding a balance or some kind of way to not make the Disney character or the Disney worlds so intrusive. And I feel like they had a balance that worked in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. And they have not been able to find that balance again ever since with pretty much any other Kingdom Hearts game. Where pretty much every Kingdom Hearts game feels like it is just like, this is just like a thick load of filler. And to some degree, obviously with Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 even, there was definitely some filler aspect of the story, but it didn't feel quite as fillery as it does in Kingdom Hearts 3. And part of that with Kingdom Hearts 3 was, kind of the premise that you're given with that game. Where Sora basically begs Yen Sid that he can advance the plot and go save Aqua. And Yen Sid tells him, no, you can't advance the plot. You have to go find the power of waking. And so then Sora fucks off for like 20 hours and doing meaninglessly meandering in Disney worlds until he finally gets the power of waking, which is Deus Ex into the story. He just suddenly has it all of a sudden. Now he can do the power of waking. So it's like, why was I playing around with Elsa all this time when I could just, look deep inside myself and have the power of waking, at any given point anyway, right? So if they could find a way in Kingdom Hearts 4 to make the Disney worlds not feel like they are intruding on the story, but an active part of it, not to an insane degree, but just at least as good as Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 are comparable, or can at least sit on like the same table where it doesn't feel like, okay, I'm doing this Disney world just so that I can get to you. Finally, there actually being some relevant story, but actually feeling like I'm playing the game and the story's progressing the whole time. And that's like the strongest part of like Kingdom Hearts 1, by the way, I think, when looking back, is that Kingdom Hearts 1 had a story that tied into the Disney world. And you guys remember like the 7 Princesses of Heart and how that was a big detail, and they kind of like flirted with the idea of bringing the 7 Princesses of Heart in Kingdom Hearts 3, but then that just didn't become anything at all whatsoever. So
Yeah.
I kind of want them to actually make the fact that these are Disney worlds relevant to something, just like they did in Kingdom Hearts 1. To a lesser extent, they did it in Kingdom Hearts 2. Kingdom Hearts 2 didn't have like as much integral integrity. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, to the Disney worlds in the overarching plot quite as much as Kingdom Hearts 1 did, but it still felt really good. Hanging out with all those Disney characters. The worlds were short, and they broke them up into 2 visits so that each visit was kind of short, but it was incredibly well paced. And then you'd come back for a second visit, and then there'd be like another really well paced sort of thing that happens there, and you get another boss fight that was more intimately tied into the story, usually when you fight your organization member. So there was a lot of things to the first 2 games' formulas that made the Disney worlds work really, really well that was entirely absent from Kingdom Hearts 3. Not to mention that Kingdom Hearts 3's boss fights in a lot of the worlds were either mini games, which was terrible idea. Please don't ever do that again. Where like so many of the final boss fights were just like actual mini games. I think of like Pirates and like Big Hero 6, or like you're riding on like Baymax, and that's like the final boss fight of a world. And I was just like, oh man, that was really unsatisfying. So more than anything, with Kingdom Hearts 4, what I am looking for is for the Disney worlds to actually be well constructed, good levels. Some actually, I don't think Kingdom Hearts has ever really had like particularly great level design, but like at least like something that makes like going around those Disney worlds feel good, because Kingdom Hearts 3 had really big worlds. They were significantly bigger than 2's, right? Because 2's just had like empty boxes, but at least in 2's empty boxes, all I had to do was just like walk forward a few steps. 3 had like these massive worlds that half the time there was just nothing in them anyway, except for finding Mickey emblems and treasure chests for synth items. So if they're gonna do big worlds again, have something in there, some kind of side content even. I don't know, but actually fill and populate the worlds with something interesting, and yeah, just make the Disney worlds non-intrusive. That's just the big thing.
For me, I kind of agree with what was said on both sides. What I want to see is I do want to see cohesion. I do want to see that everything matters, and so less is more still really fits into that, like an elegance and economy of storytelling. But what I really want to see the most is that I want to see the execution of a creative vision over an expected vision. And I feel like even some of the best parts of Kingdom Hearts 3 were fan service. And fan service isn't always bad. I think it's important to know what your fans want, and I think it's important to reward them. But there was a point where it didn't feel like it was the creative juice that made Kingdom Hearts anymore. It was more like the reward of people that have stuck it out. And there was a lot of that, particularly in the ending, that I just think made me feel a little disconnected from the magic that the first two games had. And that kind of excitement of feeling like the true creative power of the minds behind like all of the properties involved, not just Kingdom Hearts, but Disney. Like, I feel like that's really what I want to see them lean into the most. The energy, the reason I'm excited for Kingdom Hearts 4 is because when I saw the trailer for Versus 13, I was like, this is something that nobody's really done before. I haven't seen anything like this. And I felt that same kind of energy with Kingdom Hearts 4, the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. And I had the same kind of energy when I played Kingdom Hearts 1 the first time, and so I want them to lean into the thing that really made them what they are, which is this drive to be creative instead of this drive to be inclusive. And that really fits into the less is more thing. I'm a big fan of the idea of there being one or two Disney properties involved, instead of you just go to a Disney world. It tells the story of the Disney, we just go through Tangled. We just went through the plot of Tangled, but with Sora there. It was like a worse version of Frozen, but with Sora there. Like that is not needed. Maybe you don't necessarily, like, some of the best worlds in Kingdom Hearts 3 that were Disney, I thought were ones where we kind of already knew the story and they didn't really retell the whole story of the Disney movie. It was just, it's a new story in the Pirates of the Caribbean world. Like with some new villains in that continuity, and then so I'm hoping that if we do go to any like traditional Disney worlds, that if we go to the Pirates of the Caribbean world, that Amber Heard will be the villain. Okay, I'm done. So with that, guys, this was a great stream. I've been looking forward to it a long time, and I really appreciate all the support we've had from Twitch, and for those of you that are watching on YouTube later, thanks for joining. We're going to go ahead and get closing thoughts from both Philip and Night Sky, and then we're going to call it. So, Philip, give us closing thoughts.
Yeah, as I've said the whole night, and you guys will see I'm a big defender of Nomura because of kind of what happened to him, and I've just always loved his work. I just would love to see his vision, like his first big, real, original vision that he had. Which you can only have so many of those in your life, man. Which we all loved, and was, like Clark said, something we've never seen before. No one's ever done. Those ideas are so rare and should be so cherished, and was like completely bastardized. And 15's still good, but just not there. And I would love to be able to see him to do that in some way. And like I said before, it'd be cool to see them rework the structure of the game with less is more in mind. As much as I despise Marvel and everything it is, and think it's horrible, maybe that in Star Wars, like more focused, could be a good realm to go, or something along those lines.
Yeah, just drop the hottest take at the very end.
I'm already implementing the advice I gave you, right? Always put the hottest take.
That's right. I learned from NSP earlier today. But yeah, come by my Twitch if you want to argue with me. But yeah, I think it would be great. I think it'd be fancy, and I really want to see a return to that visual storytelling I mentioned before. The celebration and this pushing of cinematic language that was done by Square alone back then, FF10 era, has since gone away until FF7 remake, and I'm really excited to see Nomura come back to that and be able to just keep at that with part 2 of remake and his future stuff. And I hope one day we can get some of his vision, because that still remains one of my biggest inspirations as an artist, as a writer, as a filmmaker. Like, those damn trailers, man, unbelievably well done. And I think probably the best thing Square Enix has ever done visually, which is hilarious. It's a trailer. It makes no sense. So I'm gonna do a full breakdown of those on my channel. You guys inspired me today, so we'll go back and look at the film science of it. But yeah, that's my thoughts. If you guys want to find me, you can just type my name in any social media. I'll see you there.
Oh boy. Well, for me, I haven't always agreed with Nomura's creative decisions, particularly within the last decade or so. Me and him have had some disagreements, we'll say, on storytelling and other etc. creative decisions. However, Versus 13 has always been something that I have found deeply inspiring on a conceptual level. It's something that I had waited like a quarter of my life. Actually, no, more than that. It's like 10 years. So it's like, I guess at the time it was like almost a third of my life or more. And I've been waiting for Versus 13 for so long at that point. And then 15 finally came out. And I think the 15 has a lot of good things about it. It unfortunately didn't live up to the sort of expectations that were set by the Versus 13 direction and trailers and concept. And even still, I think that a lot of us, it speaks to how strong those ideas were, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that Nomura feels like, well, if you guys feel that strongly about the trailers, imagine how strongly you would have felt about the actual game. I'm sure that's what he thinks about a lot, and I can't blame him. I think that there is something really powerful, really beautiful about an artist who kind of was screwed over by the corporate world and corporate politics, being able to take back his vision and being able to say, I'm going to do it in this way, in this loophole, mm-hmm. that there is absolutely nothing that you can do anything about. And I'm still going to get my statement, my vision out there that I find to be really cool and really inspirational. And I really like what he's doing with the project. I have very good feelings about Kingdom Hearts 4 in a way that I did not go into with Kingdom Hearts 3. A lot of people, you tell them that you weren't satisfied with Kingdom Hearts 3, what they'll tell you is that, oh, well, your expectations, you expected too much going into Kingdom Hearts 3. That's why you were disappointed with it. I didn't expect anything from Kingdom Hearts 3. I actually went into Kingdom Hearts 3 with incredibly low expectations. So I guess I wasn't too disappointed with it because I literally wasn't expecting too much from Kingdom Hearts 3 because I Dream Drop Distance had already kind of been like an experience for me, and like I already thought that the story was going in a weird direction that I felt like was kind of like losing the magic of Kingdom Hearts for me. So I actually did not go into Kingdom Hearts 3 with high expectations at all. But I actually have. I'm very positive about Kingdom Hearts 4, and that's very different than how I felt about Kingdom Hearts 3. Because the whole time I was looking at Kingdom Hearts 3, I was just like, I don't think this is going to be the one. Kingdom Hearts 4, I do feel that way about. I do feel like this has some inspiration to it. I feel like this is rooted in something real, and not just, the fact that it takes place in reality. I feel like it's actually something that I feel the passion coming off of it, and the ideas, and it generates excitement for me, and that feels a lot more genuine than whatever the hell I was feeling with Kingdom Hearts 3. So
Thanks, guys. Hey, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks again to my guests, and I look forward to having you guys on again soon. There's more stuff on the horizon, so look to my YouTube and Twitter for announcements on future stuff. So I'm going to call it, and you guys have a great day.